Germany of Iron and Blood. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201, Ulla Charge. Warsaw, the headquarters of the Northwest Front of the Russian Army. General Samsonov called. They have arrived at Tannenberg. However, the German army has deployed heavy troops in Tannenberg, but General Samsonov claims that Tannenberg can be taken within 2 days. Fort, open the way to Königsberg. An officer reported to General Ivan Zelensky. Well, it has advanced tens of kilometers in 2 days. The combat effectiveness of the Second Army is still relatively strong. Admiral Ivan Zelensky nodded, his face full of approval. Tell Samsonov that Tannenberg is an important strategic point, and it must be taken there to open the road to Königsberg. As long as Tannenberg is taken, Königsberg can be defeated in one battle there. General Ivan Zelensky seemed very confident of this. Yes, General. The officer immediately sent a telegram. With the capture of Tannenberg, the East Prussian campaign can come to an end, and there will be no problem in capturing Königsberg. If the entire East Prussia can be occupied, then Germany's threat to the empire can be completely eliminated. The next step is to launch an attack on Berlin and completely defeat Germany. General Ivan Zelensky stood in front of the map and remained silent for a long time. He thought a lot and thought of Russia winning this battle. A standing victory. It's just that it's all like a daydream. On August 19th, after the Russian Second Army advanced to Tannenberg, General Samsonov issued an order to stop the offensive. Let all divisions start to rest and attack Tannenberg early tomorrow morning. Before sunset, I want to see the double-headed eagle flag planted in Tannenberg, Admiral Samsonov ordered. Don't worry, Your Excellency Commander. The Germans have lost the courage to fight on, and we kicked the asterisk out of them along the way. We only need to launch one attack, and we can break through their defenses and take Tannenberg, the Major General said. Haha, that's right. I didn't expect the Germans to be so weak. I really don't know why the French are so worried about the Germans attacking them. A lieutenant general couldn't believe it. The other Russian generals also laughed. They have no doubts about winning the next battle. Even Admiral Samsonov faintly felt that something was wrong. After all, the German army is known as the best in the world, and it cannot be so weak. However, he was relieved when he thought that the main force of the German army had gathered on the Western Front and fought with the French. In his view, the German side must have used the worst troops to intercept them, which is why this result was caused. Early the next morning, the Russian Second Army launched an attack on Tannenberg. In order to take Tannenberg in one go, Admiral Samsonov dispatched 4 infantry divisions with more than 60,000 people at one time. In addition, more than 400 cannons were assembled to provide fire cover for them. Such a firepower configuration is already very luxurious for the Russian army. Fire and blow up all the Germans to me. General Samsonov gave the order. More than 400 Russian cannons began shelling. However, the Russian army has always been short of cannons. Most of the more than 400 cannons are field guns with a caliber of 76.2 mm. Cannons with a caliber of more than 100 mm are pitifully few. Boom. 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 Russian cannons opened fire one after another. Orange flames gleamed at the muzzles, and shells roared towards the German positions at Tannenberg. The artillery shells exploded on the position, and clusters of flames rose. Sand and gravel splashed on the battlefield, and gunpowder smoke filled the air. When the gunpowder smoke dispersed, craters of various sizes were left on the position. However, because the Russian artillery is less powerful, facing the solid German defensive positions, it cannot cause too much damage at all, and the losses caused to the German army are naturally pitiful. General, is our artillery going to fight back? A division commander asked Lieutenant General Francois. The Russian shelling is too weak to pose any threat to us at all, so ignore them. Lieutenant General Francois said. Yes, General. The division commander nodded. Because of the limited number of shells carried, the Russian army's shelling lasted only 10 minutes before it ended. Admiral Samsonov is still very satisfied with this shelling. In his opinion, the German troops on the ground must have suffered heavy losses. Attack. Try to take Tannenberg before sunset, Admiral Samsonov ordered. Yes, General. Several division commanders in charge of the attack answered confidently. Perhaps it was because the German army's lure the enemy to go deep was so realistic that these Russian generals all thought that the German army's combat effectiveness was really bad. They are also full of confidence in the next attack, thinking that they can break through the German defense line in one fell swoop. However, they soon knew that they were dead wrong. The German army is not as weak as they expected. Everything is a trap. Attack. The order to attack reached the various units of the Russian army. Numerous Russian soldiers, holding bayonet-mounted rifles or barehanded, rushed out of their positions and launched a fierce attack on the German positions. Allah! Allah! Tens of thousands of Russian troops shouted loudly, forming an indomitable momentum. I have to admit that the Russians are still very brave in war. Their ruler charge is even more imposing. Ordinary people would be stupefied when encountering such an attack, let alone pick up weapons and continue fighting. Unfortunately, they are facing the German army. The soldiers of the 8th Army may not be the most elite of the German army, but after years of training, it has been reborn. The Russian attack certainly made them a little nervous. However, it didn't have much impact. It's hard to imagine that the Russians' equipment is so bad. Many of them don't even have guns. How are they going to fight us with their fists? Lieutenant General Mackensen, the commander of the 20th Army, put down the gun in his hand. Binoculars, shook his head and sighed. The poor equipment of the Russian army has long been known all over the world. You are not unaware of this. But don't forget, your 20th Army was defeated by such an army. Francois Zungel said with a smile. Suddenly, Lieutenant General Mackensen became very depressed. In the past, his troops had to implement the strategy of luring the enemy to go deep and deliberately fought many defeats. And this, of course, was regarded as a shame by him. However, as long as the final victory can be achieved, even these sacrifices are completely worthwhile. Chapter 202, Broken Head. Russian soldiers, shouting the slogan "Hurrah!" charged towards the German positions. The dense formation released an indomitable momentum. However, in the eyes of the officers and soldiers of the German army, this is no different from courting death. Sir, why did the Russians line up in such a dense formation to attack? Don't they know how terrible the firepower of machine guns is? A recruit who had just joined the army asked his squad leader suspiciously. Who knows? Maybe the Russians think they can stand our machine gun bullets. A machine gunner said jokingly. The Russians are not only backward in equipment, but also very backward in tactics. In addition, the education level of the Russian soldiers is very low, and most of them are even farmers who have just put down their hoes. Therefore, their offensive has no formation at all, and it is a mess. However, since you are on the battlefield, you have to put away your pity. Otherwise, that ridiculous pity will not only harm yourself, but also your comrades in arms, said the squad leader. The recruit nodded heavily and understood the squad leader's teachings. Every department is ready. Fire. Following the order of the frontline commander, the German troops on the defense line began to shoot. Da-da-da. The general-purpose machine gun first began to roar, the sound like sawing wood, which made people feel creepy. The muzzle of the gun was shining with flames, and hot bullets had already flown towards the Russian soldiers in grey uniforms. The squad's machine guns also started firing immediately, which made the firepower of the German army on the defense line even more fierce. Semi-automatic rifles, grenades, and mortars also started attacking immediately. Suddenly, the attacking Russian army was directly blocked, as if hitting an invisible wall. Moreover, under the intensive firepower of the German army, the Russian army fell to the ground in rows, as if they were cutting wheat. Boom. Boom. One after another, mortar shells and grenades fell into the Russian army's queue like raindrops, and countless Russian soldiers were torn to pieces. Of course, the most harmful thing to the Russian army is still the machine gun fire. Although, only one infantry division of the German army was deployed on the first line of defense. However, the number of machine guns equipped by an infantry division of the German army is not equipped with so many machine guns by an army or even an army group of the Russian army. This directly caused the attacking Russian army to suffer a lot in the face of the powerful firepower of the German army. The Russian generals who were watching the battle in the rear were also dumbfounded. They originally expected the Russian army to break through the German defense line in one go and take Tannenberg. However, the scene in front of them stunned all of them. Why are there so many artillery and machine guns on the German defense line? How can their firepower be so powerful? Could it be that all the machine guns and artillery of the German 8th Army have gathered at Tannenberg? Is it? A Russian general exclaimed. Damn, how could this be? How could the Germans be so powerful? The other Russian generals couldn't believe the scene in front of them. All eyes were on General Samsonov. They found that Admiral Samsonov's face was livid, and his whole body was trembling slightly. They didn't know whether he was angry or frightened. After all, Admiral Samsonov had vowed before that he would take Tannenberg before sunset. But now it seems that this is not possible at all. General Samsonov also felt like a clown. The troops who ordered the attack should withdraw immediately. Otherwise, they will all be killed by the Germans. A general suggested. The attacking Russian army has been defeated by the German army with powerful firepower. Some Russian soldiers even started to flee without receiving orders. The whole scene was very chaotic. The German army is using powerful firepower to wantonly massacre the attacking Russian army. Almost every moment, Russian soldiers will fall to the ground and lose their lives. Order the troops to stop the attack. Admiral Samsonov had to issue such an order. The other Russian generals breathed a sigh of relief. They were really afraid that Admiral Samsonov would stubbornly refuse to give the order to retreat. In that case, the consequences would be very serious. The attacking Russian army did not know how much it would cost. After receiving the order to retreat, the attacking Russian army ran back in a swarm. That speed was actually much faster than when they were attacking. There was no other way. The German bullets and shells were chasing them. If you don't run faster, you will lose your life. So, those Russian soldiers ran away desperately, wishing their parents would give them 2 more legs so that they could run faster. Some Russian soldiers threw away all their weapons and equipment in order to speed up. It can be said that the confidence accumulated by the Russian army because of the German army's lure the enemy to go deep and win so many battles has disappeared completely now. But even so, many Russian soldiers were shot and killed by the powerful firepower of the German army. On the battlefield, the corpses of Russian soldiers are everywhere. Some of the corpses have already looked down upon, leaving only clumps of mincemeat. Stumped limbs and broken arms were flying everywhere. After counting the number of the retreating Russian army, it was found that there were more than 15,000 people missing. In addition, tens of thousands of people were wounded. The attack for just a short while caused the Russian army to lose nearly 2 divisions. It can be seen how powerful the German firepower was just now. General, what should we do now? The Germans' firepower is so strong. I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to break through their defense line and occupy Tannenberg, a Russian general said with a bitter face. General, could this be a trap for the Germans? They were deliberately showing weakness before. Another general said. Admiral Samsonov's complexion was as dark as the bottom of a pot. How come no one said that before? Now that the attack has been frustrated and the head is broken in front of the German defense line, these guys jumped out one by one. Okay, our attack has only suffered a temporary setback. We can't lose confidence like this. Otherwise, how can we complete the task assigned to us by Your Excellency Commander? The Germans' firepower is strong, but we are not weak. Order the artillery to get ready, open fire in 10 minutes, and destroy the German position with artillery fire. At that time, I will see how they can stop us. General Samsonov ordered. He is determined not to die until the Yellow River, and will not give up easily. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203, Dumbfounded. Your Excellency, the commander is right. The Germans have strong machine gun fire and small caliber artillery, but that doesn't mean that their artillery fire is really powerful. Didn't they respond when we shelled before? As long as we can with powerful artillery fire, destroy their defense line in one fell swoop, and the final victory will definitely be ours. As soon as Admiral Samsonov said the words, the generals of the Russian army responded immediately. Other Russian generals also said the same thing. However, they also have a question in their hearts, that is the German artillery also hidden? No matter what, General Samsonov, I still plan to give it a try. If it doesn't work, find another way. The artillery of the Russian army quickly completed its preparations. They carried out all the remaining shells. But even so, a cannon only received 20 or 30 shells. There is no way to do this. Who made Russia's transportation facilities so bad? It is not so easy to transport a large amount of war materials from the hinterland of Russia to the front line. In addition, the Russian army is now undergoing full mobilization, which has squeezed out a large amount of railway transportation capacity. It will be even more difficult for the frontline troops to get more supplies. General, the Russian artillery is ready again. They obviously want to use artillery fire to destroy our defense line, a staff officer reported to Lieutenant General Francois. Over a small forest not far from here, a hot air balloon is floating at an altitude of hundreds of meters. The German observers above can clearly see the movement of the Russian army and use the radio to communicate with the German army on the ground in time. Order our artillery to get ready. The artillery observation balloon is also launched. Once the Russian artillery fires, immediately suppress them and destroy them all. Lieutenant General Francois ordered. Even though Lieutenant General Francois only had 4 infantry divisions in his hands, and the number of artillery was not many, the Russian army on the opposite side had the artillery of 10 infantry divisions. But even so, Lieutenant General Francois was not afraid. After the reorganization of the 8th Army, the artillery of each infantry division has been greatly enhanced. In addition to the cannons of the artillery battalions of each regiment, the entire infantry division has a total of 54 75mm field guns, 36 105mm light howitzers and 18 150mm heavy howitzers. The 4 infantry divisions have a total of 216 75mm field guns, 144 105mm light howitzers and 72 150mm heavy howitzers. In terms of quantity, it is no more than 10 infantry divisions of the Russian army. You know, the Russian infantry division usually only has 48 76.2mm field guns. This is still at full capacity, and once the replenishment cannot keep up, half of them are not bad. The northwest front of the Russian army is the main force to attack Germany. 30 infantry divisions are fully staffed and equipped with enough field artillery. But that's all. The 76.2mm field gun of the Russian army has a slightly larger caliber than the 75mm field gun of the German army. But it is far inferior to the new German artillery in terms of range and power. Not to mention the rate of fire, it is completely incomparable. The 75mm field gun equipped by the 8th Army is an imitation of the French 75mm field gun, with a maximum rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute, which is 3 times faster than the Russian 76.2mm field gun. The Russian Second Army has only a dozen 105mm field guns. As for larger caliber cannon, none were available. The current Russian army is not another Soviet army that attaches great importance to artillery in time and space. In terms of artillery fire, it cannot be compared with the European powers at all. Fire. Following the order of the Russian commander, more than 400 cannons of the Russian army began to roar. The gunners worked hard to stuff the shells one by one into the barrel, and then fired the shells out. Boom. 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 Accompanied by roars, shells roared and hit the German positions. Gunpowder smoke and dust flew up again. However, the German soldiers on the position had already been ordered to retreat to the fortifications, leaving only a small number of observers on the position. Therefore, the shelling of the Russian army could not cause much damage to the German army at all. Seeing their own artillery starting to show off, General Samsonov and other Russian generals couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. The seriousness on his face also dissipated a lot. However, after only a few minutes, their expressions changed drastically. 3 minutes later, the German shelling launched a counterattack. According to the data obtained by the observers on the observation balloon, the German artillery directly aimed at the Russian artillery positions. Fire. Under the command of the commander, the cannons began to roar. Before, when the Russian artillery was raging, they didn't get an order to fire, so they had to keep silent and let the Russian artillery show off their might. Now that the shelling order has been issued, they naturally don't have to keep it anymore. Boom. 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 150mm heavy howitzers, 105mm light howitzers and 75mm field guns fired one after another. Hundreds of cannons roared like thunder. Under the action of huge kinetic energy, one after another shells roared and smashed into the artillery positions of the Russian army. Hoo. 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 When there was a piercing whistling sound in the sky, the Russian artillerymen on the artillery position raised their heads in horror one by one. As artillerymen, they naturally knew what these sounds meant. This is clearly the ear-piercing sound made by the high-speed flight of the cannonball and the violent friction with the air. This also means that the German shells are about to hit their heads. Run. German shells are coming. My God. The Germans directly covered our artillery positions. Frightened voices sounded one after another, and the artillerymen of the Russian army scattered and fled in horror. Shells fell from the sky one after another and hit the artillery positions of the Russian army. Boom. The explosion sounded, and the airwave spread to the surroundings, and many Russian artillery were blown away. Even those cannons were blown up and down during the explosion. There are also cannons. Even the barrels are twisted into twists. As for the artillery, many were directly torn to pieces. The heavy artillery of the German army was so powerful that it caused great damage to the artillery of the Russian army, and one artillery position after another was directly destroyed. The generals of the Russian army watched this scene dumbfounded, and they were all dumbfounded. Although they had guessed before, the German artillery may be hiding its strength. However, now they know how powerful the German artillery fire is. Chapter 204, Zelensky's Choice. Admiral Samsonov and other Russian generals watched all this dumbfounded. The artillery fire of the German army, as if it had eyes, ravaged the artillery positions of the Russian army. The cannons were overturned and blown up, and the artillery one by one was torn to pieces in the explosion. General, please order the artillery to withdraw. Otherwise, our artillery will be completely lost. The artillery commander asked General Samsonov with red eyes. General Samsonov nodded. Because of the low literacy rate of the Russian army, artillery and other arms are undoubtedly extremely valuable arms. If it is wasted, it will be difficult to get replenished. Moreover, even if Admiral Samsonov was not an artilleryman, he could understand that in the current artillery battle, the Russian artillery was completely suppressed. The German artillery was so powerful that it completely crushed the Russian artillery in terms of quantity and performance. In particular, there are many large caliber heavy artillery in the artillery of the German army. These heavy artillery are undoubtedly the main force in destroying the artillery positions of the Russian army. In this regard, the artillery of the Russian army has no way to compete with it. The German shelling lasted less than 20 minutes and ended. It's not that they want to save ammunition, but that the artillery of the Russian army has already retreated out of their range, so that they have no targets, and naturally they can't continue to fire. Otherwise, it is a waste of shells. Francois, our artillery is fighting so fiercely, won't it scare the Russians away? In that case, it will be a failure. Lieutenant General Mackensen, the commander of the 20th Army, was a little worried. Don't worry, the Russians are not so easily intimidated. Even if they know our true strength, they will not give up lightly. Because this is their only chance. If they miss this opportunity, the future, I'm afraid there will never be such an opportunity again. Therefore, the Russians will definitely stick to the end. Until they lose everything, and see no hope. Lieutenant General Francois said. Lieutenant General Mackensen nodded, agreeing with Lieutenant General Francois' point of view. For a long time, the existence of East Prussia has posed a huge threat to Russia. Sending troops from East Prussia, it will not take long to reach St. Petersburg. Therefore, the Russians have always wanted to occupy East Prussia and eliminate this threat. And this war is undoubtedly Russia's last chance. If this opportunity is missed, Russia will never have such an opportunity again. Therefore, the Russians will never give up easily. On the other side, the Russian Second Army had to accept the fact that the German army was very strong and did not dare to launch an attack easily. Your Excellency, the Germans have obviously preserved their strength. Now, they are showing all their strength in Tannenberg. If we want to capture Tannenberg, I'm afraid it will be very difficult. A Russian general said, judging from the Germans' strong firepower, if we want to capture Tannenberg, we will probably lose everything. At that time, it will be impossible to march towards Königsberg. Another Russian general also said, if you use Cossack cavalry to charge, can you break through the German defense line? General Samsonov was still a little unwilling. Your Excellency, this is impossible. The Germans deployed a large number of machine guns on the defensive line, as well as many small caliber rapid fire guns. They must have concentrated the machine guns of the entire 8th Army here. Otherwise, no, there may be such intensive machine gun firepower. Under such intensive firepower, even if the heroic Cossack cavalry launched an attack, it would be nothing more than death. A cavalry division commander said. The cavalry division commander said commanders of several other cavalry divisions also nodded quickly. Let them attack the line of defense with such dense firepower. Wouldn't that let them die? Such a thing must never be done. General Samsonov nodded, no longer pressing. Order the troops to switch to a comprehensive defense. In addition, report the situation we encountered to Warsaw immediately and ask for further instructions. Admiral Samsonov ordered. Under such circumstances, he couldn't make up his mind on what to do next. If you attack, you will definitely suffer heavy losses, and you may not be able to win Tannenberg. But if you retreat, you will miss the opportunity. This also made him very unhappy. Therefore, Ivan Jelinsky, who is far away in Warsaw, can only make a choice. Who made him the commander of the Northwest Front Army. Warsaw, the headquarters of the Northwest Front of the Russian Army. Admiral Ivan Jelinsky frowned tightly, as if he had encountered some difficulty. After receiving a telegram from General Samsonov, commander of the Second Army, he sat silently for almost half an hour. Damn. The Germans, they must have been trying to show weakness. Then lure the Second Army to Tannenberg, intending to eat our Second Army in one bite, and then turn around and deal with the First Army. Huh, what a good strategy. Ivan Jelinsky snorted coldly. However, maybe even he himself didn't realize that his back was already wet with sweat. Because Ivan Jelinsky knew that if the German army's plan was successful, then the Russian army would not only be unable to defeat the German army and capture East Prussia, but would fall into a great crisis. Ivan Jelinsky even subconsciously wanted to issue an order immediately to make the Second Army retreat immediately. However, he immediately rejected this approach. Because this opportunity is really rare. The main force of the German army in the east is too small. It can be said to be the smallest in history. Once the German army mobilized its main force from the western front to return to the eastern front, the Russian army would never have such an opportunity again. Therefore, this opportunity is very rare and cannot be easily let go. Admiral Ivan Jelinsky considered it carefully for a while before making a decision. Order the Second Army to continue to attack Tannenberg. In addition, send a telegram to the First Army, telling them that the main force of the German army has been broken by the Second Army. Together with the group army, attack the main force of the German army. Jelinsky ordered. Ivan Jelinsky obviously planned to use his tactics. When the main force of the German 8th Army was assembled in Tannenberg, it was obviously not the main force defending the Russian First Army. Then, they can use the Second Army as a bait to make the First Army the main force of the attack. As long as the First Army can take Königsberg and then cooperate with the Second Army to attack the main force of the German army, then victory will still belong to Russia. Chapter 205, Counterattack. Russian Second Army Headquarters, Commander General Samsonov, after receiving a telegram from General Ivan Jelinsky, his face suddenly became a little ugly. Damn. Let the Second Army act as a bait to create an opportunity for the First Army. Isn't that asking our Second Army to take chestnuts from the First Army's fire? Admiral Samsonov roared angrily. However, of course he knew that this was the best way. With the Second Army already blocked at Tannenberg, there is no way for the First Army to make the main attack and pin its hopes of defeating the German army on the First Army. The generals of the Russian Second Army were also a little bit aggrieved. However, they did not dare to refuse to carry out the orders of Admiral Ivan Jelinsky. Otherwise, once the battle is unfavorable, I'm afraid that all of them will bear the responsibility for the failure. The current Tsar has no tolerance for defeated generals. General, what should we do now? Do you want to execute the order? A general asked. Nonsense. Is there any other way besides carrying out the order? However, that fellow leaning camp, don't be too happy this time. It's just that they are lucky. Even if they take down Connor's first fortress, captured the German crown prince, but our credit is indelible. At that time, they must share half of the spoils they got with us. Otherwise, I will not let it go. Enter Samsonov said bitterly. In this battle, he really felt a little aggrieved, but what could he do? Who made him unlucky and was regarded by the German army as a priority target for elimination. At this moment, the Russian First Army is marching towards Königsberg. However, as soon as they entered the Masurian Lake area, their marching speed slowed down. There are many swamps here, and the roads are difficult. The large troops of the Russian army march very slowly, often stopping and going. At the same time, they still encountered the blocking of the German army. Although they were blocked by small troops, the firepower was very fierce, causing considerable losses to the Russian First Army. If it weren't for the strong strength of the Russian First Army, I'm afraid it would almost be unable to hold on. When Admiral Leinenkamp received the telegram from Warsaw, he immediately burst out laughing. Haha, God bless. The damned Germans are going to trouble that guy Samsonov. I hope he can hold on. However, this also shows that what is blocking us is just a small German army. The main force of the Germans has already assembled in Tannenberg. Order the whole army to speed up. When encountering the resistance of the Germans, immediately send out cavalry to disperse them, and use the fastest time to walk out of Masurian Lake, attack Königsberg. Leinenkamp excitedly gave the order to attack. In his view, there is no doubt that the First Army won the final victory when the main force of the German army was held back by the Second Army. The Russian First Army accelerated its march, but even so, it was still as slow as a snail. The 17th Army of the German army, taking advantage of its familiar terrain and firepower, launched layers of blocking and harassment tactics against the Russian First Army, which seriously delayed their marching speed. This also created opportunities for the main force of the German 8th Army to encircle and wipe out the Russian 2nd Army, and bought enough time. Tannenberg, the headquarters of the German 11th Army. Lieutenant General Francois and others are studying the battle situation. General, the Russian army has continued to attack. A staff officer reported. What? The Russians didn't stop attacking, let alone retreat, but continued to attack? Are their brains flooded? Lieutenant General Mackensen looked surprised. The behavior of the Russians is really abnormal. Could it be possible that the Russians really came to die? Lieutenant General Francois also frowned. Generals, do the Russians want to hold back our main force through a fierce attack and create opportunities for their other troops? Don't forget that the Russian First Army is attacking from the east. Colonel Guderian, acting commander of the 8th Armored Division who participated in the meeting, said. Lieutenant General Francois and Lieutenant General Mackensen's eyes suddenly brightened. Come here, send a telegram to the 17th Army and ask if there is anything unusual about the Russian First Army. Lieutenant General Francois ordered. Yes, General. The communications officer immediately went to contact the 11th Army. There will be news soon. If the Russians really have this wishful thinking, then they are wrong. The 17th Army is not so easy to be defeated by them. However, we can't delay any longer, it's time, and we must launch a counterattack as soon as possible. If it is delayed for too long, the losses of the 17th Army will not be small. If you meet General Eckert in the future, it will be hard to talk. Lieutenant General Francois said. Lieutenant General Mackensen nodded. His 20th Army, which played the role of luring the enemy before, had already made him angry and wished to launch a counterattack earlier. As for Colonel Guderian, he was even more excited. This counterattack will be the first battle after the establishment of the 8th Armored Division. As the young colonel's acting teacher, I don't know how many people questioned him. He needs to use a hearty victory to fight back the doubts of these people. The news from the 17th Army came soon. The Russian First Army did speed up its march. However, it was still firmly held back by the 17th Army. Gentlemen, it seems that, as Colonel Guderian said, the Russians want to drag us at Tannenberg to give their First Army an opportunity. In this case, we cannot let them do so. Order all troops, prepare to launch a counterattack. As for the time for the counterattack, it will be the day after tomorrow, that is, the morning of the 21st. I think that by then the Russian Second Army's active force should be almost exhausted. When the time comes to launch a counterattack, it will definitely be possible in one fell swoop. Defeated them. Of course, the only question is how much we can achieve in the counterattack. Lieutenant General Francois said with a smile. Haha, we will definitely be able to wipe out the Second Russian Army this time. Then we will cooperate with the 17th Army and kill the First Russian Army. Lieutenant General Mackinson laughed. The rest of the generals are also all smiling. Everyone is gearing up, waiting for the time to counterattack, to finish off the Russian Second Army in one fell swoop. No matter how bad it is, it will be severely injured, and let it lose its combat effectiveness. Chapter 206, Armored Forces Dispatched. Allah. Countless Russian soldiers were driven by officers into the battlefield, holding rifles, or rushing towards the German positions with bare hands, as if they were driving animals. What awaited them was the powerful firepower of the German army. Dense firepower formed by countless semi-automatic rifles, light machine guns and general-purpose machine guns, as well as grenades and mortars, is like a steel storm. Once these steel storms enveloped the Russian army, they would bring about brutal massacres, leaving corpses all over the battlefield. The battle was extremely fierce. However, this tragedy is only for the Russian army, because the entire battlefield is completely showing a one-sided situation. The attack of the Russian army is no different from suicide. German army only needs to use powerful firepower to slaughter these Russian soldiers. The battle process has also become very simple, and even the German soldiers have gradually become numb. They only need to pull the trigger towards the dense formation of the Russian army. So many bullets fired, those Russian soldiers can always be killed. RMG-09 general purpose machine gun was firing crazily, and a belt with 250 rounds of bullets was fired within half a minute, which also made the barrel of the gun turn red. The well-trained deputy shooter, wearing asbestos gloves, immediately replaced the barrel. The whole process was smooth, and it only took more than 10 seconds. Afterwards, the general-purpose machine guns began firing again. In a place more than 100 meters in front of the fire point of this machine gun, a thick layer of corpses of Russian soldiers has been piled up. These corpses are all masterpieces of this general-purpose machine gun. Its unique sound, like sawing wood, has become the sound of death on the battlefield. Many Russian soldiers would pee their pants in fright when they heard this voice. God, aren't those Russians afraid of death? They don't know that their attack is of no use to us. If they continue to fight like this, they will only pay more casualties. A German officer said, "Why bother? The Russians themselves are going to die. Isn't that good? It would be great if all Russians could be like this. We can easily win this war," said another officer. "This is war, and no one will show mercy to the enemy, because this is the life and death of you. To show mercy to your enemies is to be cruel to yourself. There are already many such examples." This battle seemed simple to the German army. However, for the Russian army, it is not so wonderful. The troops of the Russian Second Army continued to launch attacks, but it was impossible for them to even advance to the German defense line, let alone break through the German defense line and cause casualties to the German army. After a day of fighting, the Russian army will lose 10,000 to 20,000 people. Even if the Russian Second Army has 10 infantry divisions and 6 cavalry divisions, with a total strength of nearly 200,000 troops, it won't last long. The generals have complained to General Samsonov more than once. If they continue to fight like this, their troops will be wiped out. However, General Samsonov has nothing to do. Admiral Ivan Zelinsky's orders must be carried out. Otherwise, what awaits him will be strict military law. That fellow leaning camp, why is he moving so slowly? How long will it take for him to capture Königsberg? If this continues, all my troops will die. Admiral Samsonov cursed angrily. It's a pity that no matter how Admiral Samsonov curses, the marching speed of the Russian First Army is still like a snail. It's not that they don't want to speed up, but that they really can't. The 17th Army of the German Army, using the terrain, successfully delayed the actions of the Russian Army. General Lenienkamp even tried dispatching Cossack cavalry to launch an attack, but was beaten back by the German Army with heavy losses. Under such circumstances, Admiral Leninkamp would not dare to take any more risks. He wanted to get to Königsberg, but he wanted to preserve his strength even more. Time passed bit by bit, and the vital force of the Russian Second Army was being consumed continuously. At the same time, the morale of the troops continued to decline. The counterattack of the main force of the German 8th Army is also fully prepared. On the evening of the 20th, the 8th Armored Division's residence not far from Tannenberg was brightly lit. The soldiers are hurrying up to overhaul the tanks to ensure that when the attack is launched tomorrow, every tank can be kept in peak condition. Colonel Guderian and Lieutenant Colonel Rommel even convened the officers of the 8th Armored Division to study tactics carefully and propose solutions to problems that might arise in battle. The meeting lasted until late at night. But Colonel Guderian and Lieutenant General Rommel didn't feel tired at all, only excited. Rommel, tomorrow is the first battle of our 8th Armored Division, and it is also a battle for us to prove ourselves. I believe that we will be able to succeed. Colonel Guderian sighed. Rommel nodded. He and Guderian are the youngest division commander and deputy division commander of the 8th Army and even the entire German Imperial Army. Naturally, one can imagine the pressure they are under. Even with Qin Tian's support, many people still envy their status. And the only thing they can do is to use victory to prove themselves and to prove that Qin Tian's vision is not wrong. Since His Royal Highness the Crown Prince trusts us so much, then the only thing we can bring him is victory. Tomorrow, let us prove us with the corpse of the Russian. Lieutenant Colonel Rommel said. Early the next morning, the German artillery began to shell heavily on the Russian positions. Unlike usual, their artillery fire began to extend backward after 20 minutes of raging on the Russian army's forward position, which made the Russian army commander feel that something was wrong. The artillery preparations of the German army, no matter how you look at it, looks like a precursor to a large-scale offensive. However, before the frontline officers reported the news to General Samsonov, the German counterattack began. It was the 8th Armored Division of the German army that took the lead. Both Guderian and Rommel boarded the command vehicle and personally commanded the 8th Armored Division to launch an attack. More than 100 tanks, driven by the tanks, rushed out of the position, forming a torrent of steel, and rushed towards the Russian position, as if they wanted to destroy everything in front of them. Chapter 207, Rolling. More than 100 black tanks shone with icy light under the rising sun, looking chilly. The German 20th Army, which had already been prepared, began to detour, preparing to go around behind the Russian army and block their retreat. Their task is to stop the Russian army as much as possible to ensure the result of this time. Lieutenant General Francois and Lieutenant General Mackensen both believed that it was impossible for the Russian army to withstand the attack of the 8th Armored Division. Once the Russian army is defeated, they will inevitably flee in all directions. At that time, it will be impossible to expand the results of the battle. Therefore, the actions of the 20th Army this time are directly related to how great their results are this time. Following behind the 8th Armored Division was an infantry division drawn from the 11th Army. Their task is to expand the results of the battle and wipe out the remnants of the enemy after the 8th Armored Division broke through the Russian defense line. The operation of the 8th Armored Division can be described as the first offensive of the armored forces in the world. The 8th Army attaches great importance to it. Qin Tian, General Hindenburg, Major General Ludendorff and others all rushed from Königsberg to Tannenberg to watch the battle. Although, the front line is dangerous. But when the German army is ready to counterattack, the risk factor has been minimized. It's really spectacular. There are so many tanks attacking together, no line of defense can stop it. Admiral Hindenburg sighed. At first, he thought that it was a waste of money for Qin Tian to set up an armored division. After all, the cost of forming an armored division is enough to form 5 infantry divisions. However, after witnessing the charge of the armored troops with his own eyes, he was left with incomparable admiration for Qin Tian's decision. Your Highness, will armored units become the protagonists of the battlefield in the future? Major General Ludendorff asked. He is keenly aware that armored forces will play an extremely important role in future wars. The armored force will indeed play a very important role in future wars. However, calling it the protagonist is a bit too much. In the future, the air supremacy will become the protagonist, Qin Tian said. Although, the 8th Army formed its own air force and developed it, However, when dealing with the Russian army, it seems that it is still somewhat useless. The Russians don't have a decent aviation force at all, so the Air Force of the 8th Army is mostly responsible for reconnaissance missions. Of course, this is also related to the fact that the war has just begun, and all countries have not yet paid attention to the performance of aircraft. Aviation team, Admiral Hindenburg and Major General Ludendorff couldn't believe it, although they have already seen the power of the plane. However, it is unlikely that the aircraft will replace the army and become the protagonist. However, their trust in Qin Tian made them not raise any doubts in their hearts. Those things that happened before have already proved that Qin Tian's correct foresight in the process of army development. Qin Tian didn't explain too much. After all, the current technical conditions are still too poor, and there is still a long way to go to reach the level of future generations. Although the importance of air supremacy has become more and more prominent, the Air Force has to develop slowly if it wants to become the protagonist. On the ground, the attack of the armored forces has already begun. The attack of hundreds of black tanks directly scared the Russian soldiers. They are originally farmers with little culture, and it is understandable that they will be afraid of the unknown. My god. What's that? Is that the devil? The Germans have the devil's weapon. No wonder we can't beat them. Some Russian soldiers have already fled in all directions in fright. Even the officers tried their best to stop it, but it was useless. Escape has become the only goal of those Russian soldiers. Even those officers were also frightened, and many of them were already trembling. Boom. A tank opened fire, and the 37mm artillery shells flew into the queue of the Russian army, and several Russian soldiers were immediately blown away. Boom. A shell hit a machine gun fire point of the Russian army, and immediately blew up the machine gun fire point to the sky. The Russian machine gunner was also killed. God. How did the Germans invent such a terrifying weapon? A Russian officer turned pale and fled. However, before he could escape a few steps, he was hit by a bullet flying from behind. This is a tank that started to fire. The 12.7mm heavy machine gun is so powerful that it can easily split a human body in two with a single bullet. Once hit, they are basically killed without injury. Run away. The Germans are too strong. We can't stop them at all. Panic spread among the Russian army. Facing the menacing German tanks, they chose to flee, and they didn't have the courage to continue fighting. Of course, the Russian army is not all cowards. There are still brave people. Damn Germans. Even if you have the devil's weapon, go to hell. A Russian company commander personally manipulated a Maxim heavy machine gun and opened fire on a German tank. The dense bullets hit the tank, but they were all bounced off. At most it just knocked off a little paint. The armor of the tank, though not too thick, cannot directly protect against howitzers. However, there is still no problem with hard-resistant howitzer fragments, let alone machine gun bullets. How could this be? The devil. The Germans really have the devil's weapons. The Russian company commander lost his mind. However, the tank had spotted the guy who dared to provoke him, and the turret slowly turned, aiming at the heavy machine gun and the Russian company commander. The Russian company commander was keenly aware of the crisis and wanted to escape. However, it was too late. Boom. The tank opened fire, and a shell hit the target in the blink of an eye, blowing the tank into parts, and the Russian company commander was directly torn to pieces. Under the attack of the German tanks, the Russian army on the ground collapsed directly. They didn't have the courage to intercept it, because they knew that it would be futile. Tanks one after another rushed to the Russian position. Some Russian soldiers who had no time to escape were directly run over by these tanks, leaving a ground of broken meat. Even the tank's tracks were mixed with a lot of minced meat, which looked very bloody. This battle is too easy. Are we here to fight or go on an outing? However, those tank soldiers are too bloody. They tear those Russians to pieces at every turn, or directly crush them. It turned into a meat paste. Anyway, I don't want to eat beef for today's lunch. A German infantryman complained. Chapter 208. Cavalry fighting tanks. The headquarters of the Russian Second Army is located about 10 kilometers behind the line of defense. After witnessing the fierce German artillery fire, Admiral Samsonov was very concerned about his own safety. He was afraid that his headquarters would be hit by German artillery fire. In that case, there will be no bones left. On the morning of the 21st, Admiral Samsonov got up late because he drank 2 bottles of vodka last night. The war was not going well, so that he was in a very bad mood. If it weren't for the fact that all the German civilians in the war zone had been relocated, he really wanted to send the guards to find a few German women to vent their anger. However, there wasn't even a commoner around, let alone a beautiful woman. As for finding a woman from the Kingdom of Poland, this is feasible. But Admiral Samsonov did not have the guts. If General Ivan Zelensky knew about it, it would be troublesome. Although, everyone has the rank of general. But Admiral Ivan Zelensky is the commander of the front army and the former chief of staff of the Russian army. His base ratio and qualifications are not comparable to that of Admiral Samsonov. So, General Samsonov had to drink to drown his sorrows. Although, alcohol is not allowed in the military, but this military rule is not strictly enforced in the Russian army. Russians are all alcoholics, from generals to ordinary soldiers. If they don't drink, they will feel uncomfortable and have no combat effectiveness. Therefore, the military law department had no choice but to turn a blind eye to this. General, something is wrong. The Germans have launched a large-scale counterattack. An officer reported to General Samsonov. Well, I see. Order the troops on the front line to stop the German attack according to the predetermined plan. General Samsonov said nonchalantly. The German army will launch a counterattack at the right time, which did not exceed General Samsonov's expectations. Therefore, when the Russian army launched an offensive, they were also actively building fortifications. Although, the fortifications of the Russian army are completely incomparable with the German army. However, Admiral Samsonov believes that there is no problem in stopping the German attack with a large number of Russian troops and fortifications. As long as the First Army succeeds, the battle will be reversed. Yes, General. The officer immediately went to convey the order. Admiral Samsonov began to wash in an orderly manner and then had breakfast. Although, the German shelling was very violent, which made him frown from time to time. However, Admiral Samsonov always believed that the Russian army could not defeat the German army when attacking, but even if it could not defeat the German army when defending, there should be no problem in a tie. However, General Samsonov soon learned that the ideal is plump, but the reality is the backbone. The gap between reality and his imagination was too great. General Samsonov had just finished eating bread and started drinking milk when a staff officer ran in a panic. General, our front line of defense has been breached by the Germans. Now, the Germans are attacking our depths. An officer reported with a mournful face. What? How could this be? How could the German attack be so powerful? Admiral Samsonov's face was full of disbelief. No matter how the combat effectiveness of the Russian army is, it is not so easy to break through with the fortifications. General, the Germans used a new type of weapon, covered in iron armor, capable of firing shells and machine gun bullets. We couldn't threaten the opponent at all, so we were defeated. The officer looked in shock. General Samsonov frowned. What are you talking about? Could it be the devil's weapon? General, there are rumors on the front that the Germans have mastered the devil's weapon and are invincible, said the officer. Fart. Admiral Samsonov cursed. In this regard, he will not believe it. In his opinion, this is clearly an excuse for those cowards who lost the battle on the front line. But even if you want to find an excuse, you should find a more reliable one. Devil's weapon. This is too unreliable. No matter what, the line of defense cannot be breached. Otherwise, the entire Second Army will be finished. General Samsonov made a decision after walking around the office twice. Come here, order General Landry and General Karski to lead their troops to stop the Germans. The other troops should be gathered immediately. No matter what, we must stop the Germans. Samsonov went up with order to. Yes, General. The officer immediately went to give the order. Andrei and Karski are both commanders of the Cossack Cavalry Division of the Russian Army. Two Cossack Cavalry Divisions totaled tens of thousands of people. This is the most elite Cossack cavalry. Since the Cossack cavalry worked for the Tsar, it has always been a sharp sword in the hands of the Tsar. Even when Napoleon megatron Europe, he also attached great importance to the Cossack cavalry. General Samsonov believes that no matter how strong the German attack is, the powerful Cossack cavalry will definitely be able to stop the Germans. Of course, the Cossack cavalry may have paid a lot of losses, but what does that matter? As a general of the Russian army, Samsonov also climbed out of the sea of corpses and blood, and he was used to life and death. As long as it's not your own blood, everything doesn't matter. After receiving the order from General Samsonov, Major General Landry and Major General Karski began to gather the troops in their hands, and began to prepare for the attack. The warriors of the Cossacks, the incompetent foot soldiers, defeated by the Germans, are fleeing. Once again we shall play the role of saviors. Grab your sabers, mount your steeds, and strike. Your saber, cut off the heads of the Germans, and use the blood of the Germans, to forge the glory of the Cossacks. Warriors, launch an attack and defeat the Germans in one fell swoop. Major General Andrei roared loudly. Long live the Cossacks. Long live His Majesty the Tsar. Tens of thousands of Cossack cavalry shouted slogans, and launched an attack. Tens of thousands of war horses rushed to the battlefield, and the horseshoes trampled on the ground, making a rumbling sound, just like thunder. The scene was very amazing. These Cossack cavalry rushed to the battlefield with an indomitable momentum. In the era of cold weapons, they are the masters of the battlefield. Even at the beginning of the 20th century, they were symbols of invincibility. However, their myths will soon be shattered. In front of the armored troops, the cavalry is simply scum. Chapter 209, Pebble Hit Rock. The combat power of the Cossack cavalry is undoubtedly extremely powerful. Every single one of them is a warrior, a terrifying existence. Especially in the era of cold weapons, it is even more invincible. Even after the rise of hot weapons, it still has a strong combat effectiveness. However, with the development of technology and the emergence of automatic weapons, the living space of cavalry has been inevitably squeezed. After the emergence of armored forces, cavalry will gradually withdraw from the stage of history. The 8th Armored Division of the German Army, although the tanks equipped are very simple, but no matter how simple it is still a tank, and it cannot be destroyed by the saber in the hands of the Cossack cavalry. So, when the Cossack cavalry of the two divisions appeared on the battlefield, and looked at the hundreds of iron lumps that were rumbling towards them, they were all stunned. Some people even involuntarily looked at the saber in their hands. Next, are they going to use the saber in their hands to deal with those iron lumps? This made them swallow their saliva involuntarily. Even the brave Cossack cavalry would probably have such doubts in their hearts at this moment. Sir, are we going to deal with those iron guys? They don't seem to be something we can deal with. A young Cossack cavalry asked with a sad face. Coward. The saber in the hands of the Cossack cavalry is invincible. For hundreds of years, we have defeated a large number of enemies, and won countless glory for the nation and the country. The officer reprimanded. The Cossack cavalry has no military pay, and their source of income is often the spoils seized on the battlefield and the plunder after defeating the enemy. Therefore, the Cossack cavalry is very brave, eager to fight, and fearless in battle. For them, if there is no war, there is no income. Major General Landry and Major General Karski are not looking very good at the moment. There was a faint bad feeling in their hearts, as if they had been cheated. However, it has reached the point where the arrow is on the string and has to be launched. It is obviously impossible to retreat now. At that time, Admiral Samsonov will definitely put all the responsibility for the defeat on them. Therefore, they had no choice but to bite the bullet and launch an attack. Attack. For glory. Kill those Germans. Major General Andrei ordered. Attack. Kill. Countless Cossack the cavalry shouted, driving their horses, and began to charge. The sprint speed of the Don horse is astonishing, which allows the Cossack cavalry to easily cut off a person's head with the help of the power of the horse when fighting. It's just that, facing the German tanks this time, can their usual tactics still work? The answer is negative. Are those Russians crazy? They actually launched a charge. Did they think they could smash our tanks? Lieutenant Colonel Rommel exclaimed. HMPH. Stupid Russians. Order all tanks to stop advancing and keep the distance. Machine guns and tank guns are ready. Get rid of all those Russian cavalry. Colonel Guderian gave the order indifferently. One tank after another stopped advancing, and the tank guns began to rotate, aiming at the direction in which the Russian Cossack cavalry was attacking. At the same time, the coaxial machine gun and heading machine gun in front of the tank have been loaded and ready to shoot. For the armored soldiers of the German 8th Armored Division, this battle undoubtedly made their blood boil. The scene of tens of thousands of cavalry charging is something that most people will never see in their lifetime. However, now they want to destroy these cavalry with their own hands. It's exciting to think about it. Fire. When the Cossack cavalry rushed to less than 1 kilometer from the 8th Armored Division's line of defense, Colonel Guderian gave the order to fire. Boom. 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 The tank guns of the tank fired, and the 37mm shells fell into the formation of the Cossack cavalry. Some unlucky cavalrymen were blown away, and some war horses were killed or seriously injured, and they wailed. The cavalrymen on horseback were even thrown to the ground, trampled into flesh by the galloping horses. Because the Cossack cavalry of the Russian army is too fast, and at the same time, when the 37mm tank gun fires high explosive shells, the power is not very powerful. Although the tanks of the 8th Armored Division caused certain casualties to the Cossack cavalry, the casualties were still within an acceptable range. Major General Andrei and Major General Karski also breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the Cossack cavalry rushed to the front, their combat effectiveness could be displayed. At that time, we will definitely be able to win. Machine gun fire. When the Cossack cavalry rushed to only 200 meters away from the tank, the coaxial machine guns and directional machine guns on all the tanks fired. In order to enhance the firepower, these machine guns are all 12.7mm heavy machine guns. The power is very powerful. More than 200 heavy machine guns fired, forming a dense barrage. The Cossack cavalry quickly slammed into the barrage. Immediately, the entire Cossack cavalry line came to a standstill, as if they had been punched hard. There is no way to stop. The cavalry rushing to the front has been shot to death by dense machine gun bullets. The corpses of the horses and soldiers fell to the ground, piled up layer upon layer, which seriously hindered the subsequent cavalry charge. Some people had to rein in the horses and slow down. And the cavalry in the back didn't know what happened, and didn't slow down, which caused these cavalry to collide. Many cavalry fell from their horses, and were trampled to death. The real reminder is still the machine guns of the tanks of the German 8th Armored Division. Every machine gun was firing crazily, until the barrels became hot, and then they had to stop to cool down. Countless Cossack cavalrymen were shot alive under the intensive bullet rain of the German army. Many war horses and Cossack cavalry were directly beaten into honeycombs. How is this possible? Major General Landray and Major General Karski, who were watching the battle in the rear, had already changed their expressions drastically. They never imagined that such a result would happen. Damn it, why is the firepower of the Germans so powerful? Using cavalry to attack the enemy's dense machine gun position is simply hitting a stone with a pebble, and you are looking for death. Major General Karski also cursed. But it's too late to wake up now. Their two Cossack cavalry divisions were being killed bit by bit under the strong firepower of the German army. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210. The back road is cut off. What should we do? Should we continue to attack? Some Cossack cavalry were timid. Even the bravest people will be timid when faced with such a situation. Their courage will slowly fade as the comrades around them fall one after another. Under the powerful firepower of the German army, the casualties of the Cossack cavalry began to soar, which made them timid. However, there are still brave Cossack cavalry charging against the powerful firepower of the German army. It succeeded. A tank's coaxial machine gun and heading machine gun stopped firing at the same time because of overheating. This gave a few brave Cossack cavalry a chance. They took the opportunity to rush through the last distance of more than 100 meters and rushed to the front of the German tank. Damn Germans, you are all devils, die to me. A Cossack cavalry roared loudly. He raised his saber high and looked at the tank fiercely. When A crisp the sound sounded, and the indestructible saber slashed fiercely on the tank. However, the saber was directly broken, and the damage caused by this blow to the tank was only a little pained off. How is this possible? The Cossack cavalryman was completely speechless as he looked at his broken saber. The other Cossack cavalrymen were also stunned at the same time. This is a devil's weapon. Even if it is a devil's weapon, we have to destroy it, another Cossack cavalry said. A few Cossack cavalrymen hacked around the tank, sparks flying everywhere. But it didn't cause any substantial damage to the tank at all. The few armored soldiers in the tank were frightened for a while. However, when they found that the Cossack cavalry could not threaten them at all, they all breathed a sigh of relief. After the machine guns finished cooling down, the tank soldiers launched an attack. Da. The Cossack the cavalry directly in front of the tank was killed by the heading machine gun. At the same time, the tank's turret also began to rotate, and the coaxial machine guns began to fire, sending the remaining Cossack cavalry into the hive. Stupid guy, do they really think that a saber can cut through solid armor? Colonel Guderian was very speechless. They have already paid the price for their stupidity, although I have to admit that they are all warriors and very brave. However, such bravery will only cost them their lives. Lieutenant Colonel Rommel shook his head. Order all the tanks to start moving forward and get rid of them. Colonel Guderian ordered. More than 100 tanks began to move forward, although they are not fast. But the powerful firepower is still harvesting the lives of these Cossack cavalrymen. In the eyes of the Cossack cavalry, these tanks have become synonymous with the devil. Run. We can't beat the Germans. They will kill us. Retreat immediately. The brave Cossack cavalry is timid at this moment. In front of the 8th Armored Division, they had lost the courage to continue fighting. We lost. We failed. Let's retreat. Major General Andre's face was ashamed. Retreat immediately. Major General Karski nodded and gave the order to retreat. It's just that there are not many people left in the 2 Cossack cavalry divisions of the current Russian army. More than half of them were killed or wounded in battle and left to die on the battlefield. There are still many people lost in the war. Major General Landry and Major General Karski, the number of people who can be gathered in the end is less than 2,000. These 2 Cossack cavalry divisions can be regarded as being disabled in this battle. Qin Tian, General Hindenburg and others who had been watching the battle from the rear almost dropped their jaws when they learned that the Russian Cossack the cavalry had actually launched a charge against the 8th Armored Division. Especially Qin Tian. Originally, he thought that the Polish cavalry charging the German tanks written in the history books was a fabrication. But now it seems that there is such a thing. Your Highness, the 8th Armored Division's defeat of the Russian Cossack cavalry should have been the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Russians will no longer have the courage to continue fighting. Therefore, I think the Russians should flee immediately. Yes. The 20th Army, has it arrived at the predetermined position? If they can block the Russians' retreat, we will win a big victory, Admiral Hindenburg said with some excitement. Send a telegram to ask General Mackensen. They must move quickly and not give the Russians too much time. Otherwise, our victory this time will not be perfect. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Ludendorff immediately arranged for someone to send a telegram. Half an hour later, Lieutenant General Mackensen, the commander of the 20th Army, called back. The 20th Army had arrived at the predetermined location and was speeding up the time to build a defense line, preparing to stop the Russian army. This news made Qin Tian and others heave a sigh of relief. When Qin Tian and the others thought they had won the battle, the headquarters of the Russian Second Army was gloomy. Your Excellency, the German secret weapon is too powerful. Our 2 cavalry divisions launched an attack and were defeated by them. The 2 divisions now have less than 2,000 people left. Major General Andre's eyes were red said. Even the Cossack cavalry is no match for the Germans? How can this battle continue? Admiral Samsonov couldn't help but sighed. General, find a way to retreat. The Germans are advancing towards us, and the troops along the road can't stop them at all, and they are about to collapse. If they don't retreat, they will come to us in a short time. The general suggested. Obviously, the Second Army, which has suffered heavy losses, is no match for the Germans at all. If they persist, they will only suffer heavy losses. Okay, order the troops to retreat immediately. The 22nd Infantry Division and the 23rd Infantry Division stay to stop the Germans. In any case, we need at least one day for us, Admiral Samsonov ordered. He knew that, if everyone retreated in a swarm, they would be followed and attacked by the Germans. At that time, the retreat will turn into a rout, and thus a complete loss. Yes, General. The commanders of the two infantry divisions who were named had no choice but to accept the order. But at this moment, a staff officer hurried in. General, there are a lot of Germans behind us. Suddenly, everyone's face changed drastically. Chapter 211, Siege. Admiral Samsonov couldn't help shaking. If the adjutant hadn't been quick to help him, he would have fallen to the ground. The other Russian generals all looked like dead old ladies. They all know that at this moment, for them, they have reached a desperate situation. If it fails, everyone will die here. Damn it, it's all been a German trap from start to finish. They lured us in at the beginning and kept us going until we got to Tannenberg, and then they beat us down. It's a shame we didn't even notice it. Admiral Samsonov gritted his teeth with remorse on his face. Some generals could not help but bow their heads. Some of them had raised doubts before, but in the end, everyone was dazzled by the victory. This has led to the current situation. But unfortunately, it is too late to say these now. They are about to face destruction. General, we still have a chance. The troops that the Germans blocked us have just arrived. We can launch an attack when they are not stable. We will definitely be able to break through the Germans' blockade, a general suggested. Yes, that's right. We still have so many troops. If we launch a fierce attack, it may not be possible to break through the Germans' blockade. The other Russian generals seemed to have grasped the last straw. They all agreed. Everyone has a desire to survive. The more powerful and high-ranking people are, the more they cherish their lives. If they could survive, these Russian generals would naturally not want to die. Admiral Samsonov also nodded, although he thought it was very difficult. The Germans painstakingly prepared this trap. How could they allow them to escape easily? However, you can't do nothing. Just wait here to die. It's good to even try. In that case, at least you can escape. General Samsonov knew that with his identity and military rank, even if the Russian army was defeated, his life would not be in danger, and at most he would be sent to a prisoner of war camp. However, if you can escape from birth, that would be the best. Why be a lowly prisoner of war when you can be a high-ranking general? Okay, organize troops and launch an attack on the German defense line. No matter what, we must break through their blockade. All soldiers at high speed. This is our only chance to survive. Admiral Samsonov said. Yes, General. Everyone replied. They all know that this is their only chance to survive, and they must seize it. Otherwise, it is really a dead end. When life is threatened, the efficiency of the Russian army has also become very fast. In less than half an hour, they organized an army of more than 20,000 people and launched an attack on the defense line of the German 20th Army, HMPH. These Russians really think that our combat effectiveness is very bad. Will they beat the asterisk out of us? Let all the ministries get ready and use all their combat effectiveness. Let these Russians know how much our real combat effectiveness is. Be strong. Lieutenant General Mackinson, commander of the 20th Army, ordered. Before, in order to lure the enemy, he was deliberately defeated by the Russian army, which has always been a thorn in his heart. Now, it's a good opportunity for them to rectify their names. Yes, General. The other generals of the 20th Army also took a sigh of relief, and they also wanted to avenge their shame a long time ago. Boom. 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 As soon as the Russian army launched an offensive, the German shelling began. The 20th Army has 3 infantry divisions, nearly 50,000 people, and is well equipped. There are more than 300 cannons alone, including 162 75mm field guns, 108 105mm light howitzers and 54 155mm heavy howitzers. When these cannons started to show their power at the same time, the shells smashed towards the Russian army overwhelmingly. The dense shells exploded in the Russian army queue like raindrops, tearing countless Russian soldiers to pieces. However, even so, those Russian soldiers were still gritting their teeth and charging. Their superiors told them that this was their only chance of survival. If you don't catch it, you will die. Therefore, these Russian soldiers couldn't help mustering their courage. Courage belongs to courage, but on the battlefield, victory or defeat is often not determined by courage. The Russian army, which had finally mustered up its courage, faced the German army armed to the teeth, and the outcome was naturally obvious. Fire. When the Russian army was not far from the German defense line, the commander on the front line gave the order to fire. Boom. 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 Mortars and grenades were added to the shooting. Shells and grenades of various calibers flew towards the formation of the Russian army. After the explosion, they left craters of different sizes on the ground. A large number of Russian soldiers were killed under heavy fire. Da. A pair of general-purpose machine guns and squad machine guns started firing, forming a denser firepower network. The attacking Russian army fell to the ground row after row under such intensive firepower, as if they were cutting wheat. Oh, God. Seeing that a large number of attacking Russian troops were shot and killed under the powerful German firepower, the Russian generals who were hiding behind to watch the battle couldn't help but gasped. At the same time, their hearts are constantly sinking. They couldn't help asking themselves, could they really be able to rush out under such a strong German defense? Although, the German defense line is indeed a simple position just constructed. But sophisticated weapons and powerful firepower make up for this shortcoming very well, making the defense line impregnable. Use the Cossack cavalry to attack the German line of defense. There is no secret weapon of the Germans on this line of defense. The cavalry's attack should be effective. Admiral Samsonov gritted his teeth and said. 3 Cossack cavalry divisions were mobilized and once again launched an attack on the German position. It's just that, although these Cossack cavalry launched a heroic charge, however, in the end, it still failed to succeed. Although the 3 infantry divisions of the 20th Army were not equipped with tanks, a large number of light and heavy machine guns were still a nightmare for the Russian Cossack cavalry. The cavalry with the ability to attack quickly hit the line of defense composed of a large number of machine guns, still hitting rocks with pebbles. The Cossack cavalry attack still failed to succeed. They were brave and left a lot of corpses in front of the German defense line. However, the German defense line is still impregnable. Their attack seemed useless except for consuming a lot of ammunition from the German army. Seeing this scene, the generals of the Russian army were all desperate. The German encirclement had been successful, and the next step was that they were all wiped out. Chapter 212. Big win. General, the Germans' firepower is too powerful. They have too many machine guns and small caliber rapid fire guns. Our cavalry simply cannot get close to their defense lines, let alone break through their defense lines. A Cossack cavalry division. The division commander reported to General Samsonov with a livid face. Seeing his troops being massacred by the Germans with powerful firepower, his heart seemed to be bleeding. Admiral Samsonov's face was as hen, and his whole body seemed to have his bones removed, and he suddenly lost his energy. The same is true for other Russian generals. The back road was cut off by the German army, and there was another powerful German army attacking in front. This time, they might not be able to fly even with their wings inserted. General, the Germans are too powerful. It is impossible to defeat them. Let's disperse and break through. In this case, there may be a chance of survival. Some generals suggested. Indeed, the Germans made it clear that they wanted to annihilate them all. If they stayed together, none of them could escape. On the contrary, they scattered and broke through, and one who was able to escape counted as one. In this case, the chances of survival will be greater. Admiral Samsonov is not a fool. He knows what these generals mean, nothing more than letting the large troops attract the attention of the Germans, and then they take the opportunity to lead a small group of allied troops to break through. In this case, the possibility of escaping from birth is undoubtedly still very high. As long as he could escape, even if he lost all his troops, he would not hesitate. Anyway, Russia lacks everything, except people. When all the troops are exhausted, just recruit those peasants into the army. Of course, as far as General Samsonov himself is concerned, if he is asked to trade the lives of the remaining more than 100,000 Russian soldiers for his own chance of survival, he will agree without hesitation. He is a noble general in the army. How can those lowly serfs be able to compare? Well, let's do what you want. General Chelinsky, I will explain. Good luck to everyone, and God bless us. Everyone, see you in Warsaw. Admiral Samsonov said. May God bless us. These Russian generals prayed to God very devoutly. It seems that only God can save them now. After making the decision, Admiral Samsonov immediately issued an order to disperse and break through the encirclement. The commanders of the various infantry divisions and cavalry divisions led the troops to break through in all directions. Of course, this is just an illusion. In fact, those generals are all very shrewd. If they can get to this point, their ability to save their lives will naturally not be worse. After the large forces attracted the attention of the German army, they immediately broke through under the leadership of the elite troops. Except for a few generals who failed to break through and were captured by the German army, the rest escaped successfully. It's just that these Russian generals who escaped from the encirclement lost all their troops. Naturally, there was not much threat to the German army. Even Qin Tian didn't care about these escaped Russian generals. In Qin Tian's opinion, these guys are not even as useful as ordinary Russian soldiers. Those ordinary Russian soldiers are strong. After being captured, it can also be used as a coolie. If Germany wins this battle, it will gain a large piece of existing Russian territory. The infrastructure in this territory is terrible. If large-scale construction is to be carried out, it will definitely require a large amount of investment. And these prisoners of war will be an excellent labor force. Having them around will undoubtedly save a lot of money. The current Qin Tian is known as the most successful businessman in the world. Therefore, even when fighting, he still needs to consider these aspects. After Admiral Samsonov gave the order to break through, it became more difficult for the German 8th Army to encircle and annihilate the Russian 2nd Army. Their strength is so small that the encirclement is too thin and there are loopholes everywhere, which can easily be caught by the Russians. After learning that the army began to disperse and break through, Lieutenant General Francois, who commanded the battle, immediately ordered all ministries to block the Russian army as much as possible, trying to annihilate more Russian troops. It is naturally easier to capture the Russian army than to kill those Russian troops. After all, the current Russian army has completely lost the courage to fight. With their weak will to fight, the possibility of surrendering to the German army is undoubtedly very high. Therefore, once the various departments of the German army blocked the Russian army, they tried their best to recruit and surrender the Russian army. In this case, it saves more time and effort. Surrender. Hand in your guns and don't kill. Tanks rushed up one after another, blocking the way for the Russian army to break through. Even though there are only a few of these tanks, it is far inferior to the thousands of Russian troops who are preparing to break through. But the Russian army has long been frightened. In particular, the tanks of the German army are hailed by the Russian army as weapons of the devil. When seeing these tanks appear, the Russian soldiers immediately raised their hands and surrendered to the Germans. A few tanks easily captured thousands of Russian troops. From the perspective of later generations, this is simply not realistic. However, when the tank first appeared on the battlefield, it was really possible to achieve such an effect. After these Russian troops surrendered one after another, the tank immediately called the infantry to come up to take these prisoners. Half an hour later, a company of infantry came up and took over guarding the prisoners. The tanks continued to move forward, trying to capture more Russian troops. Situations like this can be seen everywhere on the battlefield. The blocked Russian army, in order to survive, raised their hands to the German army and surrendered. Although, these Russian soldiers were very brave during the war, and they were not afraid of death. However, once they lost their will to fight, they became docile like sheep. A company or even a platoon of Russian troops can take care of thousands of Russian prisoners of war. The battle lasted until the sun went down. The German 8th Army won a big victory in the Battle of Tannenberg. The 10 infantry divisions and 6 cavalry divisions of the Russian 2nd Army were almost completely wiped out. Although, because the German 8th Army had too few troops, there were large loopholes in the encirclement, which allowed many Russian troops to escape. However, that part of the Russian army added up to only 10,000 to 20,000 people, and almost all of them are defeated generals who have lost their courage to fight, so there is nothing to worry about at all. The Russian army annihilated and captured by the German 8th Army exceeded 150,000 people. Among them, there were more than 100,000 prisoners of war alone. In addition, many Russian troops were lost on the battlefield. Chapter 213. General Hart. His Royal Highness, congratulations, we have won. Admiral Hindenburg looked joyful. It can defeat 200,000 enemies and wipe out more than 150,000 enemies in one battle. No matter when it is placed, this is already a big victory worth boasting about. What's more, the Battle of Tannenberg was just the opening battle of the entire Eastern Front. Next, there was a larger Russian army, which had already fallen into the calculations of the German army. If this Russian army can also be eliminated, then the 8th Army will win a bigger victory, which will make the 8th Army shock the entire Eastern Front and even the entire war. Well, the soldiers all worked very hard, and that's why we won. Qin Tian didn't have the habit of taking all the credit for himself. He knows very well that only when rewards and punishments are clearly defined, and he does not compete with his subordinates, can he be loved by the soldiers. Your Highness, stop being humble. If it weren't for you, how could the 8th Army have changed so much? How could it be equipped with so many advanced weapons? So, if we can win this battle, he is definitely the person who has contributed the most. Major General Ludendorff said sincerely. The other generals all looked deeply convinced. Qin Tian smiled and said nothing more. Indeed, he worked too hard for the German Empire to win this battle. Not only the army, but also the navy. Qin Tian made even greater efforts. The current high seas fleet of the German Navy is not a little stronger than the high seas fleet in another time and space, and it can be described as completely reborn. Not to mention there is a powerful submarine force, and 2 aircraft carriers, that are undergoing intense training, and will soon become combat ready. These will become an important capital for the German Navy, to win this decisive battle at sea. And all of these were changes brought about by Qin Tian. Of course, the reason why Qin Tian worked so hard was entirely for his own sake. He didn't want to become a down and out prince in exile, and he didn't want his wealth to bring him death. Through his own efforts, Qin Tian is about to achieve all this. He not only changed his own destiny, but also that of the entire German Empire. Thinking of these, Qin Tian was also very proud. In this battle, are our casualties large? Qin Tian asked. Although Germany has a population of more than 60 million, it is the most populous country in Europe after Russia. However, in Qin Tian's view, such a small population is still too small. Therefore, the life of every soldier is very precious. Your Highness, in this battle, we lost more than 2,000 soldiers. Many of them were killed while luring the enemy. Thanks to the powerful assault capabilities of the 8th Armored Division, the Russian army could not organize a decent resistance. Otherwise, our losses will be more than doubled. Major General Ludendorff said. Qin Tian nodded, but when he thought of so many people dying in the war, he felt a little uncomfortable. Of course, if it wasn't for Qin Tian, the German army's losses in this battle would probably be much more than that. Those officers and soldiers who died in battle should be well compensated. Injured officers and soldiers should be treated as much as possible. If they can recover from their injuries, they are definitely elite. As for the soldiers, who are seriously injured and disabled, let them do as much as possible, until life can be managed. Only in this way, can they continue to live in this world. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Highness. Please rest assured that we will do all of this well. Admiral Hindenburg and Major General Ludendorff both assured. They are all from aristocratic backgrounds, and their families are relatively rich, so they don't have to worry about making a living. However, as generals in the army, they naturally knew the situation of those ordinary soldiers. Once seriously injured and disabled, the consequences will be very serious. Life in the future will also be very embarrassing. As the crown prince of the empire, Qin Tian was aloof, and it was undoubtedly very commendable for him to be able to consider these things. This also made Hindenburg, Ludendorff, and other generals more convinced of Qin Tian. Although, Qin Tian is now the commander of the 8th Army, and even more expensive is the crown prince of the empire. But at the beginning, Qin Tian couldn't convince them at all. Many of them just don't oppose Qin Tian. But it is impossible to make them serve Qin Tian. However, with Qin Tian's vigorous reforms in the 8th Legion, and investing huge sums of money in refitting, the combat effectiveness of the 8th Legion has been greatly improved. Only then did the generals start to look at Qin Tian with admiration. Now, Qin Tian has shown that kind of care for ordinary soldiers, and he has not faked it at all. This is what really made the generals determined to be loyal to him. Even the Emperor of the Empire couldn't make them change this. If the Emperor of the Empire and Qin Tian gave orders at the same time, they would definitely carry out the orders given by Qin Tian without hesitation. Although this is a bit rebellious, it is also, because of their personal charm, that they have won the loyalty of the generals. Everyone, we have succeeded in the Battle of Tannenberg. Although a small number of troops of the Russian Second Army escaped, it is actually not enough to worry about. Next, we should consider how to annihilate the battle in Missouli, the first Russian army in Lake. The 17th Army is under a lot of pressure to hold back the first Russian army. If we don't help them get rid of the first Russian army earlier, the 17th Army will definitely suffer heavy losses. Qin Tian said, "Your Highness, the main force of the 11th Army and the 20th Army can leave Tannenberg and rush to Masurian Lake tomorrow. We have prepared a large number of trains, and within 3 days, the army can be transported to Masurian Lake, launched an attack on the Russian First Army there." However, the 8th Armored Division suffered a lot of tank losses in this battle, and it needs to be replenished if it is to form combat effectiveness. Major General Ludendorff said. The 8th Armored Division originally had more than 200 tanks, but after going to the battlefield, due to various mechanical problems, there were only more than 100 tanks left when they went to the battlefield. After a fierce battle, only a few dozen vehicles remained in the end. Of course, those tanks that were destroyed were all due to mechanical failures and were hardly destroyed by the Russian army. Qin Tian's German Arms Company has developed tanks and started mass production to equip troops. However, due to technological constraints, there is still no good solution in terms of reliability. Don't worry about the tanks. The German Armament Company has already sent a new batch of tanks in advance. Let the train go directly to Masurian Lake, and the 8th Armored Division can change gear there. Qin Tian had already thought of a solution way out. Chapter 214, Little Maoki's Doubts. The news that the German 8th Army annihilated a Russian army group in one fell swoop in the Battle of Tannenberg and wiped out more than 150,000 enemies was reported to the German General Staff, War Department and Kaiser Wilhelm II immediately. When the news report came up, Wilhelm II was listening to the progress of the war at the General Staff, and the Minister of War von Falkenhayn was also here. Therefore, the three of them knew the news almost at the same time. The current battle situation is generally beneficial to Germany. The German army has made a breakthrough on the Western Front. Although the Belgians are still resisting, the passage has been opened. The main force of the German army can pass through Belgium and attack France from the north of France. Although, it took a lot of time and lost a lot of troops, but the German army still firmly holds the initiative in this war. Therefore, William II is still in a relatively good mood. Zhao Maoki, the chief of the General Staff, had his power further expanded during the war. This also made him very satisfied. If he can command the German army to win this battle, then he will definitely be promoted to Marshal. Even after retiring from active service, his status is still lofty. Even if Qin Tian succeeds to the throne and becomes the Emperor of the Empire, nothing can be done to him. What? The 8th Army won on the Eastern Front and wiped out more than 150,000 enemies? God, how is this possible? William II couldn't believe it himself. You know, in this war, what he was most worried about was that the 8th Army would not be able to withstand the Russian attack. In that case, it will inevitably have a great adverse impact on Germany's overall strategy. But now it seems that the 8th Army has undoubtedly given him a great surprise. Not only resisted the attack of the Russian army, but also won the battle, which really surprised him. It also made all the doubts in his heart disappear at once. Little Maoki's face changed a lot. Originally, he also thought that the 8th Army might be caught in a bitter battle on the Eastern Front. Even if it barely resisted the Russian attack, it would suffer heavy losses. At that time, he can let the prepared troops enter the Eastern Front battlefield and appear as a savior, thereby taking over the Eastern Front battlefield and exempting Qin Tian from controlling the army. It can be said that little Maoki imagined everything very well. However, the current result gave him a slap in the face. Congratulations, Your Majesty. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince won on the Eastern Front, which undoubtedly means that the threat to us from the Russians is minimal. We can boldly use the main force to attack France, von Falkenhayn said. He had also been worried about the Eastern Front, although Qin Tian is very confident about the war. But these old people who have experienced countless wars are not so optimistic. Now, Qin Tian's 8th Army won the victory on the Eastern Front, and the heart that had been hanging over him was finally put back in his stomach. HMPH. Your Excellency the Minister of War, it's too early to say this now. I doubt very much how the 8th Army of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince won the victory so easily. You know, the Russians used it to attack the northwest of East Prussia. The front army has more than 500,000 people. Even if the fighting power of the Russians is too poor, it is impossible to win easily. Little Maoki shook his head. The faces of Wilhelm II and von Falkenhayn have become unsightly. Xiao Maoki was simply questioning Qin Tian's lie about the military situation. This is almost a very serious crime in Germany, where military laws are strict. If Qin Tian really did this, William II could even use this to depose Qin Tian from the position of Crown Prince. However, William II still believed in Qin Tian. He believed that Qin Tian would not cheat on this issue. Once found out, the consequences will be very serious. Your Excellency, Chief of Staff, you are slandering His Highness the Crown Prince. How could His Highness the Crown Prince do such a thing? Von Falkenhayn accused. Minister of War, I didn't slander His Highness the Crown Prince, I just raised doubts. Could it be that His Highness the Crown Prince can't doubt it? Xiao Maoki said forcefully. King Wilhelm II took a deep look at Little Maoki. He now believed that the conflict between Little Maoki and Qin Tian had become more and more acute, and had even had an impact on the ongoing war in Germany. It seems that it's time to solve this problem. William II secretly made up his mind. Come here, go and find out the real situation of the Battle of Tannenberg. William II gave the order with a dark face. Little Maoki saw William II's face, and couldn't help feeling a little regretful. However, things have already happened. No matter how much he can make up for it, he can't make up for it. Therefore, he could only bite the bullet, and walk all the way to the dark. William II used the royal family's intelligence system to find out the details of the Battle of Tannenberg in only half an hour. After William II read the detailed report, the anger on his face finally dissipated, and even a smile appeared on his face. Let's all take a look. Wilhelm II handed the report to Little Moltke von Falkenhayn. After Xiao Maoki read the report, his face was already dark, as if it was the bottom of a pot. He also has some regrets now. He jumped out to question Qin Tian if he knew about it. It's alright now, how can I take back what I said? Moreover, offending William II this time is obviously not worth the candle. Von Falkenhayn laughed out loud. Your Excellency, Chief of the General Staff, what else do you have to say now? Von Falkenhayn looked at Little Maoki provocatively. Your Excellency the Minister of War, it seems that I was wrong to blame His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. However, the 8th Army is just the 2nd Army that defeated the Russian army, and there is also the 1st Army that is more powerful. They sent additional troops to the front line. Therefore, the pressure on the 8th Army is still very high. Xiao Maoki was still stubborn. Von Falkenhayn smiled and said nothing more. William II shook his head. Let's ignore the Eastern Front for the time being. I believe that Oscar will be able to win on the Eastern Front. The originally reserved troops should all be used on the Western Front. The Western Front is the key. William II didn't want to waste any more time on this issue, and made a decision directly. Yes, Your Majesty. Although Xiao Maoki was a little unwilling, he still nodded and stopped objecting. Little Maoki knew it himself. Because of today's incident, William II's dissatisfaction with him has increased. But he didn't find the reason on himself, but attributed everything to Qin Tian, and he hated Qin Tian even more. Chapter 215, Escape. The disastrous defeat of the Russian Second Army at Tannenberg was a major blow to the entire Russian Northwest Front. Although the strength of the Second Army only accounted for 40% of the entire Northwest Front Army. However, without the support of the Second Army, can the Russian army defeat the German 8th Army and realize the planned plan to occupy East Prussia? That is obviously impossible. The Battle of Tannenberg has already shown the Russians how powerful the German army is. The strength of the Russian First Army, even if it is a little stronger than the Second Army, is very limited. Under such circumstances, it is obviously impossible to defeat the German army. General Ivan Zelensky was having dinner when he learned that the Second Army had suffered a disastrous defeat. The vodka tastes very good with a good steak. In the Kingdom of Poland, the great Russians always had the best of the best. For example, the food on the table and the beautiful Polish girls standing around. As long as General Ivan Zelensky is willing, he can eat them all. But it is a pity that General Ivan Zelensky soon lost the mood to linger on these beautiful girls. General, there is a telegram from the front line. A staff officer rushed in with a look of panic. What happened? Admiral Ivan Zelensky said with some displeasure. He was very upset when he was interrupted from eating and watching beautiful women. However, as the commander of the Northwest Front Army and the senior general of the Russian army, he can still distinguish between the important and the important. General, the Second Army suffered a disastrous defeat at Tannenberg. General Samsonov ordered the entire army to disperse and break through. Based on the current situation, very few troops successfully broke through. The staff officer reported. What? That idiot Samsonov, who gave him the order to break through? Admiral Ivan Zelensky was furious. From what the staff officer said just now, the Second Army may be finished, which made him furious. Although the Second Army's offensive at Tannenberg was frustrated, Admiral Ivan Zelensky had a bad feeling and realized that this might be a German conspiracy. Therefore, he changed the battle plan, using the Second Army as a bait to hold back the main force of the German army and put the hope of breakthrough on the First Army. However, he never expected that the final result would be like this. General, the Second Army was attacked fiercely by the Germans. The frontline positions were lost, and the army was defeated in large numbers. Even the Cossack cavalry was used, but they could not stop the German offensive. Instead, they suffered heavy losses. As a last resort, Samsonov General Husband ordered the dispersal to break through. The staff officer continued. Of course, Admiral Ivan Zelensky knew all this. Admiral Samsonov would never have issued such an order if it had not been a last resort. But even so, such a heavy loss still made General Ivan Zelensky unacceptable. The Second Army is finished, which also indicates that the Russian Northwest Front Army may have no hope of winning in this battle. It might even fail. Such consequences are not something he can bear. Contact Samsonov immediately. I want to know what happened. Why can't the Second Army survive even a day under the German offensive? Admiral Ivan Zelensky said with a dark face said. Although, he now knows that he underestimated the combat effectiveness of the German army before. However, no matter how strong the German army is, it will not be so strong, right? It is unbelievable to defeat hundreds of thousands of people in the Russian Second Army in one day. Yes, General. The staff officer nodded, ready to leave. He didn't want to stay here any longer and bear the wrath of Admiral Ivan Zelensky. Wait, send a telegram to General Lenin Camp, telling him to retreat immediately and stop advancing. Admiral Ivan Zelensky ordered. The staff officer was taken aback for a moment, then saluted, turned and left. Admiral Ivan Zelensky ordered the First Army to start retreating, which is undoubtedly tantamount to giving up hope of victory. However, this is also impossible. With the disastrous defeat of the Second Army, the situation of the First Army may also be very dangerous. If you continue to advance, you will inevitably be besieged by the main force of the German army. Even the Second Army was defeated in one day. General Ivan Zelensky didn't think the First Army could last long. Damn the Germans, how could their fighting power be so strong? Admiral Ivan Zelensky couldn't help cursing. Although, he thought he had fully understood the strategy of the German army and made deployments. But he still didn't expect that the German army's combat effectiveness would be so powerful, so this time he lost miserably. All he can do now is to withdraw from the First Army and preserve his strength. As for defeating the German army and winning, this is a matter of the future. You have to get more reinforcement from the country first. Otherwise, everything will be empty talk. Admiral Ivan Zelensky raised his head, looked at the beautiful Polish girls, and then jumped on them like a hungry tiger. Now he is too angry. He needs to vent his anger well. Screams rang out in the room, but no one came to save these Polish girls. Perhaps this is the tragic fate of the enslaved Poles. Lake Manchuria, the Russian First Army is still attacking with difficulty. The difficult road, coupled with the blocking of the German 17th Army, made their advance very slow. At the same time, the casualties of the troops are also increasing. This made General Lenienkamp, the commander of the Russian First Army, very depressed. Admiral Ivan Jelinsky gave him an order to quickly capture Königsberg at all costs, and then go south, to cooperate with the Second Army, to annihilate the main force of the German army at Tannenberg. Originally, Admiral Lenienkamp thought that this was a good job, allowing his army to rob in the bustling Königsberg. But unexpectedly, they have been delayed in Manchurian Lake. This made General Lenienkamp very angry, but he couldn't vent his anger. General, urgent call from Your Excellency Commander. A staff officer ran towards Admiral Lenienkamp in panic. Admiral Lenienkamp couldn't help but frowned. However, when he read the telegram, his face also changed drastically. Damn it, how did that fellow Samsonov fail so quickly? From the beginning to the end, this was a German trap. Admiral Lenienkamp roared in horror. Retreat. The whole army retreats. Chapter 216. Pursue. Hurry up. The train is coming soon, and all departments should be ready. Be sure to bring all the equipment on the train within half an hour. A regiment commander ordered the officers and soldiers of the battalions and companies below. Tannenberg railway station has become the busiest railway station in East Prussia. The 11th Corps, 20th Corps, and 8th Armored Division of the 8th Army had to be transferred from here to Lake Manchuria Point. The 8th Armored Division has already left one step ahead. They need to receive new tanks, and then spend time familiarizing themselves with their new tanks, so that they can form combat effectiveness as soon as possible, and catch up with the battle against the Russian First Army. A few minutes later, a train entered the station. During the time when the train was adding water and coal, the soldiers entered the carriages in order. Of course, in order to transport as many soldiers and equipment as possible, each carriage was packed to the brim, like canned sardines. Although it is not as good as the spring festival travel in later generations of Huaksha, it is almost the same. In particular, Germans are generally taller, and it is undoubtedly even more aggrieved to squeeze them into the carriage. It's just that these Germans are tough. Soldiers, in particular, are able to endure pain, and no one complains of suffering. In order to transport as many troops as possible to Lake Manchuria, in addition to railway transportation, road transportation is also essential. Maybach trucks, loaded with heavily armed German soldiers, rushed towards Lake Manchuria. Although the weight of the current trucks is not large, a truck can only transport a squad of soldiers and their equipment. However, Qin Tian equipped the 8th Army with more than 2,000 trucks. Deducting the trucks used to transport supplies, he could transport the soldiers of a division and their equipment to Lake Manchuria at one time. Thanks to the fact that Germany attaches great importance to transportation construction, whether it is railways or roads, the density is the highest in the whole of Europe, and the quality is also the best. This allows the German 8th Army to quickly turn in. According to the plan of the 8th Army Staff Headquarters, it only took 2 days to transport the 11th Army, 20th Army and 8th Armored Division to Lake Manchuria. In other words, on the night of August 23rd, they will all be able to reach the east of Lake Manchuria and enter the predetermined position. From August 24th, it will be possible to launch an offensive. It is almost impossible for the Russian First Army to withdraw from the Manchurian Lake area within 2 days, especially with the 17th Army following them and launching an attack. They had been delaying the Russian First Army before and had to retreat many times in order not to scare the Russians. Therefore, most of the combat power cannot be brought into play. Now it is undoubtedly to let them let go of their hands and feet. This will naturally allow the 17th Army to fully display its combat effectiveness, thereby further causing greater casualties to the Russian army, delaying their retreat speed, and creating opportunities for the main force to catch up. Buy more time. Fire. On the morning of August 23rd, on the artillery position of the 87th Infantry Division of the 17th Army of the German Army, a door of 75mm field guns, 105mm light howitzers, and 155mm heavy howitzers had raised their muzzles and aimed at the Russian army. A blocking position point when the commander of the Russian First Army, General Lenienkamp, also expected that the German army would pursue them when he retreated, so he left a lot of Russian troops to block the German army. In order to delay the German army, their main force retreated to buy more time. The First Army suffered heavy losses in the previous battles. However, the main force is still there. After all, this group army is a huge group army with 20 infantry divisions and 2 cavalry divisions. It has a very strong force, with a total force of more than 300,000 troops. Even after deducting the battle damage, there are still nearly 300,000 troops, which is still a powerful group army. It's just that General Leinenkamp has been frightened, and he doesn't dare to stay and continue fighting. The German 8th Army can easily eat the 2nd Army, which undoubtedly proves that their combat effectiveness is much stronger than that of the Russian 2nd Army. You know, even the 1st Army is not capable of defeating the 2nd Army in such a short period of time. Therefore, General Leinenkamp naturally believes that his 1st Army is far from being the opponent of the German army. Then, for him, retreat has undoubtedly become the best choice. Even General Ivan Jelinski, who stayed in Warsaw, held the same view. Therefore, Admiral Leinenkamp was able to make up his mind to speed up the retreat and ignore the others. Boom. 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 The German cannons fired violently, smashing shells one after another onto the positions of the Russian infantry divisions. Intensive explosions sounded, and the Russian army, which had only built a simple defensive position, could not withstand the fierce German shelling at all. Their fortifications were easily destroyed by shelling. The Russian soldiers hiding inside were either killed or injured. The shelling by the German army lasted for half an hour. Such a violent shelling directly smashed the Russian army's defense line to pieces, and the casualties were even more severe. Even, the Russian army in some areas has already retreated voluntarily due to heavy casualties. Subsequently, the German army launched an offensive. Powerful firepower gave the German army a great advantage in defense, and they could use powerful firepower to kill the enemy. When attacking, the powerful firepower also makes them have extremely powerful attack power. When the German army attacked, the Russian army on the defense line was often suppressed by the powerful firepower and couldn't even raise their heads, let alone counterattack. In addition, the morale of the broken troops is already relatively low, and the will to fight is also very weak. Facing the powerful German attack, their defense quickly fell apart. After the line of defense was breached, a large number of Russian troops fled in all directions. Once caught up, these Russian soldiers will often raise their hands and surrender. For those with weak will to fight, keeping their own lives is the most important thing. This caused the German 17th Army to capture many Russian officers and soldiers during the pursuit of the Russian army. In order to accommodate these prisoners of war, a lot of their time was wasted. But even so, it is not so easy for the Russian First Army to leave Lake Mazuria. In order to escape the pursuit and interception of the German army, the Russian army even voluntarily gave up a large amount of heavy equipment. They never thought about how they would fight the Germans without these heavy equipment once blocked by the Germans. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217, Leave All. On the night of August 23rd, the temporary headquarters of the Russian First Army, although they have been on the run for 2 days. However, it was still not possible to escape from the Masurian Lake area. The German 17th Army was in hot pursuit of them, and they don't know when the pursuers will arrive. This made the officers and soldiers of the Russian 12th Army panic when they fled. General, the 14th Infantry Division was defeated by the Germans. Most of the soldiers have been captured by the Germans, and only a very few escaped back. Now, the Germans' pursuit is no more than 30 kilometers away from us. A staff officer reported to Admiral Leinenkamp. Bastard. Is this the real fighting power of the Germans? No wonder the Second Army was defeated so badly. It turns out that the fighting power of the Germans is so strong. We are like fools, easily deceived by the Germans. The trap was carefully laid out, but we jumped in foolishly. Admiral Leinenkamp looked remorseful. It's a pity that it's too late to say these things now. Who let them be dazzled by the victory before? Thinking about it carefully, the German army's poor combat effectiveness at the beginning is undoubtedly very suspicious. But it is a pity that these Russian generals thought this was a good opportunity to capture East Prussia and capture the German crown prince alive. The result was good, and he trapped himself in it. If not done well, the entire army will be wiped out here. If there is any medicine for regret, Admiral Leinenkamp believes that he and Admiral Ivan Zielinski will definitely run out of reasons to buy one. But alas, not at all. Order the 15th Infantry Division to stay and stop the Germans. No matter what, we must resist the German attack and buy us more time to retreat, Admiral Leinenkamp ordered. In the face of the frenzied pursuit of the German army, he can only keep the troops behind to stop the German army so as to buy time. In this case, they will continue to weaken their strength, which is tantamount to quenching thirst with poison. But there is no way around it. If troops are not sent to break the rear, they will soon be caught up by the German army. At that time, no one can escape. Yes, General, the staff officer replied. In addition, General, Warsaw received a call. The main force of the Germans is withdrawing from Tannenberg on a large scale. Judging their intentions, they are here to deal with us. Your Excellency Commander, request us to evacuate as soon as possible to avoid falling into the hands of the Germans. In the encirclement, the staff officer continued to report. Bastard. After the Germans solved the Second Army, they really targeted us. Admiral Leinenkamp cursed secretly. Tell your Excellency, Commander, we are already doing our best to retreat. However, affected by the pursuit of the Germans, our retreat speed is very slow. If we cannot retreat, we will fight the Germans to the death. Leinenkamp said. What he said undoubtedly meant that their first army had prepared for the worst. Yes, General. The staff officer immediately went to convey the order. Königsberg, Qin Tian, Admiral Hindenburg and others returned here after winning the Battle of Tannenberg. In Qin Tian's view, after the Second Russian Army was killed, the First Army was also unable to fly. In this battle, the German Army will win, Your Highness. The 8th Armored Division, the 11th Army, the 20th Army, and the 17th Army have arrived at the front line. The Russian First Army still has not been able to retreat successfully. Tomorrow morning, the 8th Armored Division, the 17th Army, the 11th Army and the 20th Army will divide into 3 groups to attack the Russian army and strive to wipe out the Russian First Army in one fell swoop. It can be foreseen that the annihilation of this Russian army is already a certainty, Admiral Hindenburg said. All the generals of the German army were almost beaming. It is a great honor for everyone to be able to kill all the invading Russian army, a front army with 500,000 people, in this battle. Although, before the war broke out, everyone still had some doubts about winning. But now, everyone has become extremely determined. Because they believe that a huge victory is already in front of them, and they only need to reach out to get it. Your Highness, after the first Russian army has been annihilated, the Russian Northwest Front has no troops left. Can we launch an attack on Warsaw next? If it is too late, the Russian army may mobilize more troops to Warsaw, Major General Ludendorff suggested. East Prussia is a huge protrusion for Germany and an important base for Germany to threaten Russia. Similarly, the Kingdom of Poland is also a huge salient to Russia. It is only a few tens of kilometers from the western border of the Kingdom of Poland to Berlin, the capital of Germany. Of course, this has always been the focus of the German army's defense. Unless Russia mobilizes an absolute main force to launch an attack, otherwise it will not be able to pose a threat to Berlin. But such a favorable salient is still something Russia is unwilling to give up. If the Kingdom of Poland was occupied by Germany, this salient would be smoothed out by Germany. At that time, it will undoubtedly be very difficult for Germany to threaten Berlin. Therefore, the German 8th Army Staff Department believes that it is impossible for the Russian army to watch the Kingdom of Poland being occupied by Germany. Even after the Northwest Front was defeated by the Germans, Russia would send more troops to the Kingdom of Poland to continue fighting the Germans. Therefore, the 8th Army still has battles to fight. No way. Although the Russians have sufficient troops, they have plenty of troops to die. After the Battle of Tannenberg and the Battle of Masurian Lake, let the troops rest for a week. Wait for the soldiers to take a good rest, and at the same time, replenish the losses of the various troops. After that, we will attack the Kingdom of Poland. I believe that since we can defeat the Russian Northwest Front Army, we can defeat more Russian troops. Even if they send reinforcement to defend the Kingdom of Poland, the final victory still belongs to us. Qin Tian said firmly. Yes, Your Highness. Admirals Hindenburg and Ludendorff had no objection to Qin Tian's decision. After days of fighting, the troops really need to rest. Otherwise, the combat effectiveness of the troops will be greatly affected. However, the first thing we have to do is to eat up the German First Army. Send a telegram to the generals on the front line and strive to keep all the officers and soldiers of the Russian First Army. This is hundreds of thousands of people, all resolved if it falls. It will be enough to teach the Russians a profound lesson, Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Highness. Chapter 218, Put all one's eggs in one basket. East of Lake Majorca, the German 11th Army and 20th Army are building defensive positions based on the terrain, relying on villages and small towns. As for the 8th Armored Division, they are getting acquainted with their tanks. Early tomorrow morning, if the Russian army does not launch an attack, they will start to advance westward in an orderly manner, further reducing the living space of the Russian army. After the Russian Second Army was dealt with in Tannenberg, the officers and soldiers of the German 8th Army had a clearer understanding of their combat effectiveness. This made them more confident in this battle. General, a telegram from His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. A staff officer found Lieutenant General Francois who was patrolling the defense line and handed him the telegram from Qin Tian. After Lieutenant General Francois read the telegram, he couldn't help showing a smile on his face. Everyone, Your Royal Highness is very concerned about our next battle. After we have solved the Russian First Army, we will have a week's rest. However, His Royal Highness also hopes that we can keep all the Russians who invaded the German Empire and destroyed our homeland. Kill all the Russians. We can definitely kill all the invading Russians. Those Russians have no other advantage except for a little more numbers. It would be too cheap to kill them all. We can capture them all and use them to rebuild the destroyed homeland. The generals began to discuss how to deal with these Russians, as if these Russians were not scary at all and could be easily dealt with by them. The 20th Army and the 8th Armored Division also received a telegram from Qin Tian. They are also full of confidence in tomorrow's battle. At this moment, the Russian First Army is on its way overnight. In the case of chasing troops, after blocking back and forth, they can only escape as fast as possible. But soon, the Russian army still discovered that they could not run past the German army. The road ahead has been cut off by the German army. On the night of August 23rd, Admiral Leinenkamp issued an order to march overnight, because he found that the German army would stop pursuing at night, which made it easier for them to retreat. It's just that this makes the soldiers of the Russian army more tired. Many people were very sleepy. If their lives were not threatened, they would probably fall asleep directly on the road. General, the 4th Infantry Division reported that they had exchanged fire with the Germans. A staff officer reported to Major General Leinenkamp in panic. What? They found the Germans? How is this possible? How could the Germans run ahead of us? Admiral Leinenkamp jumped up, his face full of disbelief. The other Russian generals also panicked. They always wanted to rush out and escape before the formation of the German encirclement. Unexpectedly, they rushed day and night and even let many troops go to the rear, but in the end they still failed. General, what should we do now? The Germans have really blocked us, a major general said in horror. God, are we going to follow in the footsteps of the Second Army? The generals of the Russian army also panicked into a group. No matter how proud they are usually, but at this time, they are nothing but clowns whose lives are threatened. The speed of the Germans is faster than we imagined. It seems that we have seriously underestimated them. However, this is also understandable. The transportation construction of the Germans is far more developed than that of Russia. So, they were able to complete the mobilization of troops in such a short period of time. General Leinenkamp said with a wry smile. Generals, for us, the current situation is undoubtedly very dangerous. If we are not careful, we will follow in the footsteps of the Second Army and be wiped out by the Germans. Don't think that our troops are stronger than the Second Army. There are many Second Armies, so I doubt this. At least, in my opinion, the Germans can easily eliminate the Second Army, so their combat effectiveness is much stronger than ours. Therefore, we are now almost dead. General Leinenkamp continued. General, what should we do now? Is it possible to do nothing and just wait for death? A general asked. Of course we can't just wait to die like this. Although the situation is very unfavorable to us. But we must try our best to fight for a chance. I decided to let the troops stop retreating and rest for one night. Tomorrow during the day, launch an attack on the German positions onslaught. If we can break through the direction of the Germans within a day, we still have a chance to escape. If we fail, then everyone will accept their fate. Admiral Leinenkamp said. The generals were silent. Of course, they also know that there is no way to do this. The reason why Admiral Leinenkamp decided to put all his eggs in one basket was because there was no other way. If you don't work hard, it is really a dead end. The general is right. There is only one way in front of us now. If we want to survive, we have to fight the Germans. As long as we can break through the German defenses and escape back, we will survive. Hope. One of the generals said. Of course, in addition to this road, if you want to survive, there is another way, and that is to surrender to the Germans. As generals, if they surrender, they can at least guarantee their lives. However, on this occasion, no one dared to say this method. Since this is the case, let's fight the Germans. Anyway, as long as we can escape, we will have a chance to make a comeback. It doesn't matter if the troops are exhausted. I believe that enough soldiers have been mobilized in the country. As long as we go back, we can get supplements immediately. Another general said. This point of view has been recognized by other generals. Indeed, these Russian generals did not take the lives of ordinary soldiers seriously. In their view, they are nothing more than cannon fodder. If they could use these cannon fodder to guarantee their own lives, they would not hesitate to abandon these cannon fodder. Soon, the generals of the Russian army reached a consensus and decided to invest in the army to launch an attack early tomorrow morning. This time, they will put all their eggs in one basket and devote all their main forces to fight for that chance of survival. Everyone, go back and prepare. May God bless us and the Russian Empire. Admiral Leinenkamp prayed. God bless us, bless the Russian Empire. All the generals prayed very devoutly. Chapter 219. Desperately. Early in the morning on August 24th, the officers and soldiers of the German army were still asleep, but they were all awakened by the emergency military situation. After dawn, the observation post discovered that a large number of Russian troops appeared 2 kilometers in front of the position. It's densely packed, I don't know how many there are. The observation post immediately issued a warning. Even though the officers and soldiers were very tired, many of them didn't wake up at all. But the military situation is an order, which makes them take up arms at the first time and prepare to fight. Whether it is infantry, artillery, or the armored soldiers of the 8th Armored Division, they all entered a state of combat readiness immediately. What's going on? Lieutenant General Francois also rushed to the front line. General, the Russians launched a tentative attack on our defense line last night. At first, I thought they would give up, but I didn't expect that they started preparing to attack early this morning. A major general reported. These Russians have their brains caught by the door. Don't they know that when the Russian Second Army was in Tannenberg, it also tried to break through our position? As a result, in front of our position, there were piles of dead bodies. Lieutenant General Francois said in disbelief. After all, the Russian Second Army has already served as a lesson for the past, and the Russian army should have been prepared for this. Who knows? Maybe those Russians are like this. The Major General said. Well, no matter what the Russians are going to do, since they plan to take the initiative to attack, that is our advantage. Order the ministries and prepare for battle. Once the Russians dare to attack, I will wipe them all out. Lieutenant General Francois ordered. Yes, General. The Major General nodded. Get the artillery ready. Once the Russians fire, suppress them immediately. We can't let the Russian artillery fire cause us too much damage. Lieutenant General Francois urged. Although, I learned from the 17th Army that the Russian army had discarded a lot of cannons during their escape. But the Russian First Army has 20 infantry divisions. If it is full, it will be equipped with at least 960 76.2mm field guns. Although so many cannons are small caliber field guns, they are enough to pose a serious threat to the German army. Yes, General. The Major General's face was serious. Lieutenant General Francois inspected the positions and was very satisfied to see that the soldiers were confidently preparing to meet the Russian attack. It only rang when he was about to return to his command post. The soldiers were woken up early in the morning and they didn't even have time to eat breakfast. Let the cooking soldiers prepare breakfast and send it to the front line, even if it's all bread. You can't let the soldiers fight hungry. Who knows how long this battle will last? Lieutenant General Francois ordered. Once the Russian army launches a full-scale offensive, a large-scale battle will inevitably break out. The battle may last for a long time, even more than a day. In battle, it may be difficult for soldiers to find opportunities to fill their stomachs. Therefore, Lieutenant General Francois had to prepare early. The commander of the Major General was stunned for a moment, then nodded. Okay, General, I will give orders immediately. On the opposite Russian army position, officers at all levels of the Russian army are giving lectures to the troops. There is only one general content, that is, they are in a very dangerous situation now, and they are chasing soldiers after they are intercepted. If they cannot defeat the German army blocking the front in today's battle, then they will only have a dead end. The speeches of the Russian officers made the Russian soldiers understand how dangerous their situation was, although they have no culture. However, this does not prevent them from having a strong desire to survive. In the eyes of almost every Russian soldier, there is a strong desire to survive. None of them wanted to die, they wanted to live. And the only way to survive is to defeat the Russians blocking their retreat. These Russian soldiers once again mustered up their courage and forgot their timidity. This is also the reason why the ancient Chinese art of war said, "Don't stop when you return to your teacher." If a troop is cut off from retreating, it will explode with extremely strong fighting power. Especially in the era of cold weapons, it often determines the outcome of a battle. Of course, now is the era of hot weapons, especially the German army is equipped with a large number of automatic weapons. Therefore, they had no worries about cutting off the Russians' retreat, have enough firepower to make even the Russian army full of fighting spirit fall into the sand. Order. The artillery, hit me hard. Fire all the shells. If you can't break through the German defense line, those cannons and shells are useless. Admiral Leinenkamp ordered. Yes, General. A few minutes later, the Russian artillery began shelling. Their remaining cannon, more than 300 more, were assembled. Although, these cannons are all 76.2mm field guns. However, with so many field artillery shelling, the power is still amazing. Boom. 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 One by one shells roared and smashed into the German positions. The gunners of the Russian army fired hard and fired more shells, because they knew that once the Germans started to fight back, they would never have another chance. Just 2 minutes after the Russian shelling started, the German shelling began to counterattack. The artillery of one of the infantry divisions of Sir launched a counterattack, and then the other artillery joined in. In terms of quantity, it is no better than the Russian army's cannons, and in terms of caliber, range, and power, it can suppress the Russian army's artillery fire. But even the German artillery suppression caused great losses to the Russian artillery. But their bombardment never stopped, but became more powerful. The shelling of the Russian army forced the frontline troops of the German army to withdraw to the fortifications. Many of the fortifications they built were also destroyed. After all, this is just a fortification built hastily by the German army overnight, and it is not very strong, and cannot withstand the attack of artillery shells. But the officers and soldiers of the German army believed that under their artillery counterattack, the Russian artillery would soon be destroyed. At that time, it will no longer be a threat to them. It's just that, what everyone didn't expect, was that the Russian infantry launched an attack before the Russian artillery stopped shelling. More than 20,000 Russian soldiers, holding rifles and roaring loudly, attacked the German positions. They seemed not at all afraid of being accidentally injured by their own shells. Chapter 220, Massacre. Got. What do these Russians want to do? They are trying too hard. The generals of the German army couldn't help being stunned after seeing the attack method of the Russian army. You must know that in order to avoid being accidentally injured by your own artillery when attacking, you will often wait until your own artillery starts to extend into the depth of the enemy before launching an attack. But now, the artillery fire of the Russian army is still preparing for firepower, bombarding the forward positions of the German army. Their infantry has already launched an attack, which is amazing. In the eyes of ordinary people, Admiral Leinenkamp must be crazy. However, only he himself knows that there is no way to do it. Who made the Germans too strong, and they too weak? If they follow the conventional style of play, they will definitely not be able to break through the German defense line. The Second Army was easily and seriously injured by the German army with powerful firepower. This is a lesson from the past. So, Admiral Leinenkamp came up with this crazy tactic. That is, not afraid of accidental injury. While the artillery bombarded, the infantry also attacked. This made it impossible for the German army to hide in the fortifications and had to enter the position to resist the attack of the Russian army. In this case, the artillery of the Russian army may be able to cause greater damage to the German army. If you are lucky, there is no chance of severely injuring the German army. In this case, the Russian army is more likely to escape. Damn Russians, are they going to fight us desperately? Lieutenant General Francois also turned pale when he heard the news. Obviously, this tactic of the Russians made them very embarrassed. Although the German army's combat effectiveness is very strong, too few troops is a flaw. The Russians used suicide attacks to exchange casualties with the German army, which would inevitably cause the German army to pay a lot of losses. General, what should we do now? HMPH. The Russians dare to fight. Don't we dare to fight? The soldiers of the German Empire are the bravest in the world. Lieutenant General Francois said. Order the infantry, enter the position immediately, and prepare to fight. No matter how high the price is, stop the Russians, and keep them all. In addition, tell the artillery to do their best to suppress the Russian artillery. Can they suppressing the Russians in the shortest time will determine how many casualties we will suffer in this battle. Lieutenant General Francois ordered. When there is no other way, this method can only be used. Yes, General. All the German generals know that Lieutenant General Francois is also preparing to fight the Russians desperately. After the order was issued, the German soldiers hiding in the anti-gun cave were a little dazed. After all, the explosion above the head is still going on, which undoubtedly shows that the Russian shelling is still going on. If you go out now, isn't that courting death? However, the bounden duty of a soldier is to obey orders. Since the superiors gave the order, they had no choice but to obey. What's more, after learning that the Russians had adopted such desperate tactics, they had no reason to say anything more. After all, even the Russians dared to go all out, so why wouldn't they dare? Warriors, take up your weapons and prepare to fight. Let the Russians know that the warriors of the German Empire are not afraid of death. A company commander followed roared loudly, and after finishing speaking, he was the first to rush out of the blast hole. The other soldiers followed closely behind, rushed out of the artillery hole, entered the position, and prepared to fight. Boom. A 76.2mm artillery shell fell, and several soldiers were blown away on the spot. But the other soldiers, before they even had time to fear, advanced further along the communication trenches and reached the forward positions, ready to fight. They can only use the lives of the Russians in the ensuing battle to avenge their dead comrades. The German troops on the front line got out of the anti-bomb holes and other fortifications where they were hiding and entered the forward positions to fight. The shelling of the Russian army caused them a lot of casualties. However, no one flinched. Everyone is working hard. On the artillery positions of the German army, a large number of gunners took off their shirts and carried shells shirtless. There were beads of sweat all over their bodies, but they didn't even have time to wipe it off. In order to make their comrades sacrifice less, they must suppress the Russian artillery fire in the shortest possible time. Only in this way can the casualties of one's own side be reduced. The fierce battle started like this. It can be said that this battle has directly entered the climax stage. Boom. Boom. Russian artillery shells kept falling on the German positions, and soldiers died in the explosion from time to time. But the rest are still fighting. In this process, the Russian infantry was not far from the German position. Fire. Kill those Russians. The German frontline commander ordered. Da. The German machine gunners, who had been suffocating for a long time, started shooting first. A series of general-purpose machine guns and squad machine guns began to fire wildly, and the dense bullets enveloped the Russian offensive line like a steel storm. And all the officers and soldiers of the Russian army who were enveloped were shot and killed, and many of them were even hit by dozens of bullets and turned into honeycombs. Boom. 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 Mortars and grenades from door to door also started firing, and dense shells and grenades smashed towards the Russian army's formation. The shells exploded, and shrapnel shot out, harvesting the lives of these Russian soldiers. The Russian soldiers also performed extremely bravely in this battle. They know that, if they don't work hard, they will die. So, they have no other choice. The Russian generals who were watching the battle in the rear, took a deep breath one by one. Damn it, the firepower of the Germans is indeed very strong. They are so extravagant to equip an army with so many machine guns. This is too crazy. The generals of the Russian army exclaimed. Although, the cost of the machine gun is not high. However, after the machine gun is equipped, follow-up supplies are very important. Equipped with a large number of machine guns, this will undoubtedly increase the supply of troops. In their view, this view of the Germans is really too wasteful. But I have to admit that, after being equipped with a large number of machine guns, the firepower has indeed been enhanced to the extreme. At least, on defense. In the face of the powerful firepower of the German army, although the Russian officers and soldiers are desperately attacking. However, their attack is useless at all, and they are sending them to death. That's right, the Russian army's attack is completely killing them. In the face of the powerful firepower of the German army, they simply could not rush to the front of the German defense line, let alone break through the German defense line. The corpses of the Russian army have already piled up a thick layer on the ground. Chapter 221, Last Chance. Boom. Boom. A grenadier is firing crazily, launching grenades weighing 0.5 kilograms into the Russian army ranks 300 to 400 meters away. Although, a grenade weighing only 0.5 kilograms is only slightly more powerful than a grenade. However, the distance of a few hundred meters is beyond the reach of manpower. Coupled with the lightweight, a person can easily carry it away, while carrying a rifle. 2 or 3 additional grenades for the other soldiers are enough for a battle. Therefore, once this weapon was equipped with troops, it won the favor of soldiers of the German army. The infantry of the 8th Army, each squad is equipped with such a grenadier. This allowed the infantry firepower of the German 8th Army to be further improved. An infantry squad was, at some point, even able to hold its own against a platoon of the enemy. Grenades exploded in the queue of the Russian army, and Russian soldiers were blown away from time to time. God, how come there are so many German machine guns and small caliber artillery? Are we really not facing the main force of the Germans? Many Russian soldiers asked themselves this way. In the propaganda of the Russian generals, the enemy they faced was nothing more than the worst unit in the German army. The Russian generals had good intentions and wanted to use this to build confidence for the Russian soldiers. However, after seeing the strength of the German army, it actually aroused more fear in the hearts of the Russian soldiers. In their view, the weakest branch of the German Empire army is so powerful, how powerful the elite troops must be. A general-purpose machine gun was firing crazily, and a chain of bullets was fired in less than a minute, and the barrel had already turned red. There are at least hundreds of Russian soldiers shot and killed by this general-purpose machine gun. However, there are still many Russian troops attacking frantically in front of the position, making the German soldiers dare not off slack for a moment. Boom. A 76.2mm artillery shell fell from the sky and hit this point of fire. This heavy machine gun was blown into parts all at once, scattered everywhere, and the machine gunner was killed on the spot. This heavy machine gun was destroyed, which also caused a loophole in the German defense line. The Russian soldiers who were suppressed lying on the ground and unable to advance a step immediately seized this opportunity, got up from the ground, and began to charge. However, these Russian soldiers had just ran out a few steps when they were knocked to the ground by oncoming machine gun bullets. The layout of the firepower points of the German army is very scientific. Usually 2 or more machine guns form cross firepower points. In this way, even if one of the machine guns is destroyed, the other machine guns can block the enemy's attack path with fire. Give the reserve machine guns time to bring up. The German army successfully withstood the Russian attack with powerful firepower. and it caused the Russian army to pay great casualties. But at the same time, the artillery of the Russian army was also causing casualties to the German army. The falling shells are taking the lives of brave German soldiers. The artillery of the German army is suppressing the artillery of the Russian army. Although, under their shelling, many artillery positions of the Russian army have been destroyed. But it will take time to completely destroy all the artillery positions of the Russian army. Although they have worked hard, they still cannot completely destroy the Russian artillery in a short time. Boom. 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 A 150mm heavy howitzer position of the German army. 6 150mm heavy howitzers are firing fiercely. The target of their shelling was an artillery position of the Russian army. The shells of the 150mm heavy howitzer weigh tens of kilograms, and their power is far beyond that of a small caliber artillery such as the 76.2mm field gun. Almost every shell that falls leaves a huge crater in the ground. The artillery position of the Russian army has been almost destroyed. Of the dozen or so 76.2mm howitzers originally deployed here, only 2 are still firing. The other cannons have been destroyed, and some even have their barrels twisted like twists. The corpses of the artillerymen on the ground were scattered all over the place. Some are even just a pile of mincemeat. The last 2 cannons on this artillery position of the Russian army did not last long. Just 2 minutes later, they misfired one after another. The German heavy artillery began to shift targets and continued to shell the next Russian artillery position. As the artillery positions of the Russian army were continuously destroyed by the heavy artillery of the German army, the threat they posed to the German army became smaller and smaller. This allowed the German soldiers to devote more energy to dealing with the Russian infantry. The generals of the Russian army also realized this, and the situation seemed to be becoming more and more unfavorable to them. General, our artillery has suffered heavy losses. Up to now, we have lost more than 60% of our artillery. The remaining artillery will not last long. The artillery commander reported to Admiral Leinenkamp. Admiral Leinenkamp's brows could not help but frown tightly. Although they had caused some casualties to the German army in the battle just now, the German army's firepower was too strong, making it impossible for the Russian army to break through the German army's attack. The line of defense. At the same time, the loss is very large. Once the artillery of the Russian army is destroyed, this will further reduce the threat of the Russian army. It is even more difficult for the Russian army to break through the German defense line and escape from birth. Let the artillery continue to fire. No matter what, we must continue to attack the Germans. Admiral Leinenkamp ordered. Yes, General. The artillery commander nodded, with a look of sadness in his eyes. The artillery of the Russian army is not very strong. After this fierce battle, it will cause serious damage to the artillery of the Russian army. Let our cavalry get ready to attack in 10 minutes. This is a last chance. If the cavalry can seize this opportunity and break through the German defenses, we will be able to break through their encirclement. If we all fail, then we are really doomed. Admiral Leinenkamp said. Yes, General. The commanders of the 2 cavalry divisions replied. The Russian First Army has only 2 cavalry divisions. In the previous battles, these 2 divisions also lost a lot of people, and now there are only more than 6,000 people left. But even so, this is already the most powerful assault force in the hands of Admiral Leinenkamp. He has high hopes for this cavalry, hoping that they can seize this last chance and bring victory to the Russian army. Chapter 222, 220th Desperate. Come on. To survive, break through the German defense line. Kill them all. More than 6,000 Russian cavalry shouted loudly. The whips in their hands slapped the horses' buttocks fiercely. Under the pain, the horse gradually began to speed up. More than 6,000 war horses, that is, nearly 25,000 horse legs. These horse legs trampled on the ground, making a thunderous sound, as if the ground was shaking. The Russian army dispatched cavalry, and the German army knew it immediately. General, the front line of defense is already very difficult to resist the Russian infantry attack. If the Russian cavalry launches an attack, it may be difficult to resist. A staff officer was a little worried. The Russian cavalry should be the last force they have prepared. If we can resist their cavalry, then there will be no suspense in this battle. A colonel staff officer said. Lieutenant General Francois nodded. He also knew that resisting the attack of the Russian cavalry would be the key to this battle. If it resists, the Russian army in the encirclement will be finished. In the case of heavy losses, it is impossible for them to break through the encirclement of the German army. But if it is not able to withstand it, then this time's combat operation may fall short. At that time, the main force of the surrounded Russian army will withdraw. The losses of the German army may also rise further. Although, in this battle, they have already wiped out many Russian troops. But Lieutenant General Francois hopes that this battle can be drawn to a perfect end. What's more, although the combat effectiveness of the Russian army is very poor, since they can become the standing army of the Russian army, these soldiers must be good. If they are put back, and when they are rearmed, it may cause Germany a lot of trouble again. Lieutenant General Francois does not want this to happen. HMPH. Do the Russians think their cavalry is a powerful assault force? You know, our armored force is the most powerful assault force, a staff officer said disdainfully. Lieutenant General Francois's eyes immediately brightened. Indeed, the combat effectiveness of the 8th Armored Division had been tested in the Battle of Tannenberg. That is definitely a powerful assault force, surpassing any previous troops. Give order to the 8th Armored Division and let them go into battle immediately. Since the Russians want to use cavalry to break through our defenses, let them touch the 8th Armored Division. Look at their cavalry powerful, or our armored force. Lieutenant General Francois ordered. Yes, General. The 8th Armored Division, the moment the battle started, it was ready for battle. It's just that no combat order has been received. So, they've been resting. After receiving the order, the armored soldiers launched their tanks and rushed to the battlefield immediately. After the replacement of the new tanks, the number of tanks owned by the 8th Armored Division has returned to more than 200. Moreover, the new mass-produced tanks have made many improvements. Especially in terms of reliability, it has improved a lot. This made the armored soldiers not have to worry. When fighting on the battlefield, the tank would be turned off, unable to move forward, and could only watch the enemy slip away. Allah, Allah, kill all the Germans. On the battlefield, the Russian infantry cheered after seeing the cavalry charge. They lost a large number of corpses in front of the German line of defense. They have been beaten down and lost confidence. Now, the appearance of the cavalry has restored their confidence. After all, in the eyes of ordinary Russian soldiers, their cavalry is the most powerful, and no one can stop their cavalry from attacking. Any enemy will be crushed in front of the cavalry's charge. The cavalry of the Russian army launched a fierce attack amidst the cheers of the infantry. They seem to be full of confidence, thinking that they will be able to break through the defense line of the opposing German army. However, it is at this time. Iron bumps appeared on the German defense line. Under the sunlight, these iron bumps shone with a cold light. Even though it's August, it's hot weather. But the officers and soldiers of the Russian army still felt a kind of coldness that penetrated into the bone marrow in this scene. What is that? The Russian cavalry who were charging also found the iron lumps that were slowly approaching them. What the asterisk are the Germans doing? Did they think they could withstand the charge of the heroic Cossack cavalry? These Russian cavalry, I don't know what those are. However, the Russian generals watching the battle in the rear couldn't help but pale. From the intelligence from Warsaw, they already knew that the German army had a secret weapon that was invulnerable. The disastrous defeat of the Second Army was largely due to the attack of this secret weapon of the German army. Can our cavalry defeat these iron bumps? No Russian general would think that the Russian cavalry has this ability. After all, the lessons learned by the Second Army have already explained all this. Boom. Boom. The tanks of the 8th Armored Division of the German army began to fire, and shells flew into the cavalry formation of the Russian army one after another, blowing up many Russian generals from their horses. God! The cavalry of the Russian army couldn't help but exclaimed. At this time, the tank continued to move forward, and the distance between the tank and the Russian cavalry was getting closer. Da-da-da. When the tank's coaxial machine guns and directional machine guns began to fire, the dense rain of bullets suddenly made the charging Russian cavalry feel as if they had hit an invisible wall. The brave Russian cavalry and their horses were smashed against this invisible wall. Machine guns. The Germans have machine guns and those iron lumps. Too many machine guns, too powerful firepower, we simply can't rush through. The confidence on the faces of the Russian Cossack cavalry has long since disappeared, replaced by panic. Facing the tanks of the German 8th Armored Division, they simply couldn't rush through. A large number of Russian cavalry suffered heavy casualties in the face of the powerful firepower of the 8th Armored Division cavalry in front fell, and the Russian cavalry behind rushed up, and were beaten into a sieve. The rest of the Russian cavalry reined in their horses in horror, not daring to move forward. The tanks of the 8th Armored Division are still slowly approaching, constantly using tank guns and machine guns to harvest the lives of the Russian cavalry. Under such a blow, the Russian cavalry quickly collapsed. The remaining troops fled back in embarrassment. As for the infantry of the Russian army, they retreated immediately. Even the Cossack cavalry are no match for those iron lumps, let alone them. The last chance of the Russian army was killed by the 8th Armored Division. They have no way out. Chapter 223, Surrender. Boom. After defeating the Russian Cossack cavalry, the German 8th Armored Division did not stop pursuing, but continued to advance, approaching the Russian position. Got. Those black devils are coming. Let's run away. Countless Russian soldiers had been frightened by the tanks of the German 8th Armored Division. They simply didn't have the courage to continue fighting, and retreated one after another. Even the generals of the Russian army were all in mourning. They knew it was really over this time. Despite their last-ditch efforts and heavy losses, but still can't change the result. Fortunately, the German 8th Armored Division did not continue to pursue, and retreated after driving the Russian army for almost 5 kilometers. It's not that they don't want to continue to chase, but that the fierce battle just now has caused problems with many parts of the tank, and they need to be replaced to avoid more trouble. The performance of the current tank is still very bad, especially the reliability, which has become an extremely important factor restricting the performance of the tank. If the German army wants to fight a blitzkrieg, it must first further improve the performance of the tank. At least it must be ensured that the tank can penetrate hundreds of kilometers without any problems. Otherwise, the blitzkrieg is nothing more than delusional. The German army stopped its pursuit, which made the retreating Russian army finally breathe a sigh of relief. Many people actually have a feeling of surviving after a catastrophe. General, what should we do now? In today's battle, the troops suffered heavy losses, especially the cavalry. There are only more than 1,000 people left. The artillery has been completely lost. We have no strength, so organize another battle. Similar attacks. A Russian general looked desperate. The other generals of the Russian army also had extremely ugly faces, almost all with expressions of no confidence. Today's battle has completely wiped out all their confidence. The powerful firepower of the German army, especially the last armored unit, gave them a fatal blow. When they first learned of the disastrous defeat of the Second Army, they still somewhat despised the Second Army for being too weak. But now, they know that it's not that the Second Army is too weak, but that the Germans are too strong. If it were them, they would not be the opponents of the Germans either. General, since we can no longer ensure the breakout of large forces, then, let's disperse the breakout. Just like what the Second Army did in the end, we can escape as much as possible. A general suggested. Yes, General. We have no other choice. The other generals also said. Everyone, don't forget the terrain here. This is the Masurian Lake Swamp area. Those traffic arteries that can pass are all under the control of the German army. The rest are impassable swamps. If you disperse and break through, we have to go through those swamps. At that time, I'm afraid that not many people will be able to get out alive. A Russian general broke everyone's head. Those Russian generals suggested breaking out of the siege, nothing more than wanting to gather elite troops, protect them to break out, and ensure that they can escape. As for ordinary Russian soldiers, they can only give up. However, if it is to cross the swamp, it is different. Those bottomless swamps will not swallow them, just because they are generals. Suddenly, the faces of the Russian generals became very ugly. If it is also possible to lose their lives in a scattered breakout, then they will definitely not make that choice. All eyes were on Admiral Leinenkamp. After feeling the desire of his subordinates to survive, Admiral Leinenkamp also felt tremendous pressure. These generals, as well as the more than 200,000 Russian soldiers, don't want to die. Let's go back first. Let me think about it. Admiral Leinenkamp said. Yes, General. Although some Russian generals hesitated to speak, they never spoke. Everyone handed over the power of choice to General Leinenkamp. After everyone left, Admiral Leinenkamp fell into deep thought. Now they can be said to have fallen into a desperate situation. If no miracle happens, then they are dead. Of course, General Leinenkamp never believed in miracles. Admiral Leinenkamp is 61 years old, neat and straight, with two curled beards. During the Russo-Japanese War and the suppression of the revolution in 1905, he was well known in the army for his bravery, decisiveness, and strategy. However, there is a thin shadow over this general, that is, he is a descendant of Germans, and people have certain doubts about his loyalty. Well, since you don't trust me in the first place, then there is no need for me to continue working for the Tsar. After thinking for a long time, General Leinenkamp finally made up his mind. Because he is of German descent, he was treated unequally in Russia. This time, his life was threatened again. Therefore, Admiral Leinenkamp made up his mind to betray the Russian Empire. Come here, pass my letter secretly to the Russians. Admiral Leinenkamp found his confidant and adjutant and solemnly handed him the letter written by himself. The adjutant obviously knew what this meant and nodded with a serious face. This adjutant was an orphan raised by General Leinenkamp himself, and he was very loyal to General Leinenkamp. He has long been very dissatisfied with the unfair treatment of Admiral Leinenkamp in Russia. General Leinenkamp's adjutant, with a secret letter, went to the German defense line. After some twists and turns, he met Lieutenant General Francois. Your Excellency, General, this is a letter from General Leinenkamp. The adjutant handed over the superstition to Lieutenant General Francois. Because Admiral Leinenkamp is of German origin, he can also speak German. So, the secret letter was written in German. Although Lieutenant General Francois was a little surprised, he opened the letter and read it. When he read the letter, he was stunned. He never expected that a senior Russian general like General Leinenkamp would voluntarily surrender to Germany, which was beyond his expectation. General Leinenkamp, do you really want to surrender? Lieutenant General Francois asked in surprise. Yes, General. Now the Russian First Army has no other way out. Apart from surrender, there is no other way to survive. What's more, the general has been discriminated against in Russia. The Tsar and others are doubting his loyalty. That's why he decided to surrender to Germany, the adjutant explained. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224, Deji. General Leinenkamp is willing to surrender to us? Ladies and gentlemen, you see, do we agree to his surrender request? Qin Tian asked the members of the 8th Army. After Lieutenant General Francois received the secret letter from Admiral Leinenkamp, he reported to Königsberg immediately. Even though it was already late at night, Qin Tian still summoned General Hindenburg, General Ludendorff and others to discuss the situation. Your Highness, I know Leinenkamp. He is indeed of German origin. It's just that his family has lived in Russia for too long. Admiral Hindenburg said. Then it is true that he was discriminated against and treated unfairly in Russia? Qin Tian asked. This is true. Admiral Leinenkamp is generally considered a relatively capable general. At least, among those generals in Russia, he is considered to be a relatively outstanding one. And the current political ecology of Russia, and it is relatively dark. Therefore, Admiral Leinenkamp, who is of German origin, will naturally become the target of many people. It is his luck to become a general of the Russian army. If he is not careful, he may even die. They will all be lost, Admiral Ludendorff said. Qin Tian nodded. The current situation in Russia is very bad. He knows this. So, shall we agree to Leinenkamp's request for surrender? Qin Tian asked. Your Highness, in my opinion, let's agree. After all, there are still more than 200,000 people left in the Russian First Army. If we refuse them to surrender, they will definitely fight desperately. At that time, there will be another fierce battle. Of course we have the ability to wipe them out. But we will inevitably pay a certain loss. And this is completely unnecessary. Deputy Chief of Staff and Chief of Operations Brigadier General Maximum Hoffman said. Yes, Your Highness. If the Russian army can surrender, then we won't need to spend a single soldier to deal with the First Army. Not to mention, just 200,000 prisoners of war are used as free labor, which will allow us to take over in the reconstruction of East Prussia that has come down. There are many things left. Colonel Manstein also meant the same thing. Since everyone thinks this way, let's accept General Leinenkamp's surrender. Qin Tian nodded. In fact, he also thought so in his heart. However, as the commander-in-chief, it is natural to listen to the opinions of his subordinates extensively. Avoid making mistakes as much as possible. Your Highness, there is no problem in accepting General Leinenkamp's surrender. But at the same time, we also need to be prepared. After all, no one will be sure whether this is a conspiracy before it happens. Major General Ludendorff said, well, let General Francois and the others be more careful. When the Russian army surrendered, all the tanks of the 8th Armored Division went up. If the Russians dare to play tricks, they will all be killed. Qin Tian, a murderous look flashed in his eyes. The most intolerable thing for him is to be cheated. If Admiral Leinenkamp used his surrender as a trick this time, Qin Tian would definitely make him die a miserable death. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Ludendorff nodded. By the way, General Leinenkamp hopes that we can save his family. Let our friends in Russia help out. We have given them so much support, and now it is time for them to repay us. King God said, requesting the German side to rescue the family. This is also a condition for Admiral Leinenkamp to agree to surrender. For Qin Tian, this is not a problem at all. Germany has many spies in Russia. Qin Tian's Deutsche Industrial Group also had business in Russia before. Even though Russia was evacuated before the war broke out, some people were secretly left behind. In addition, Qin Tian has always supported the Cloth Party. In Russia, the Cloth Party can be regarded as a local snake. With their help, everything will be very easy. After Qin Tian's order reached the front line, Lieutenant General Francois, Lieutenant General Mackensen and Lieutenant General Zeckert all took action. On the one hand, they informed General Leinenkamp that the German side had accepted his surrender. On the other hand, it is to make various arrangements to prevent accidents from happening. Even if this is the conspiracy of Admiral Leinenkamp, it must be foolproof. Received a reply from Germany, General Leinenkamp immediately summoned the main generals of the Russian First Army to formally inform everyone of his decision. Most of the Russian generals have no opinion on surrendering to Germany. After all, with the battle at this stage, if you want to win, it is basically impossible. If you want to save your own life, surrender is inevitable. Even, many generals have already made preparations in this regard. Originally they were worried that Admiral Leinenkamp would refuse to surrender to Germany, but they did not expect that Admiral Leinenkamp had already contacted the German side, which saved them a lot of trouble. In addition, since this decision was made by Admiral Leinenkamp, the most important responsibility will also be borne by General Leinenkamp, and they have relatively little responsibility. Even if Tsar Nicholas I blamed it, they couldn't blame them. Of course, many people who were not loyal to the Russian Empire wanted to resist, but ended up being subdued by the guards. These people will be handed over to the German side next. On the morning of August 27th, the Russian First Army formally surrendered to the German 8th Army. Lieutenant General Francois, on behalf of the German side, received the gun from General Leinenkamp. More than 200,000 Russian troops calmly accepted this result. For these Russians, keeping their own lives is the most important thing. As for the shame and the like, let's put it aside for the time being. With the surrender of the Russian First Army, the Russian Northwest Front can be regarded as dead in name only. A huge group army with more than 500,000 troops was almost completely lost in just 10 days. It is undoubtedly a miracle that the German 8th Army, with less than 200,000 troops, was able to eat 500,000 Russian troops within 10 days. Of course, the 8th Army achieved such an unprecedented victory, which made the situation of the German army and even the Allies on the Eastern Front battlefield greatly improved at once. Although, the Russian threat still exists. However, the elimination of the most elite 500,000 soldiers from the standing army has undoubtedly severely damaged Russia's vitality. At least, until the mobilization is completed, it will be difficult for Russia to send more troops to the Kingdom of Poland, and it will not be able to pose a threat to East Prussia. Chapter 225, Mooch's Worries. In Berlin, the capital of Germany, at the General Staff, Kaiser Wilhelm II is listening to the report of the Chief of General Staff Moltke on the results of the French border battle with a smile on his face. 3 days ago, the battle on the French border finally came to an end. In this battle, the German Empire successfully defeated the British and French allied forces, and won the French border battle. This battle started on August 8th, and ended on August 24th, which lasted half a month. The battle started on August 8th, and ended on August 24th, which lasted half a month. Two sides dispatched a total of more than 3.5 million troops. However, the British and French allied forces, which were superior in strength, were still no match for the elite German army, and lost the battle. The German army attempted to use the main force of the right wing, 22 armies and 7 cavalry divisions, to detour west of Paris through Belgium, encircling and annihilating the main force of the coalition forces on the French-Belgian border. The Anglo-French coalition forces, 22 half armies and 7 half cavalry divisions, deployed on the lines of Etain, Montmedy, Charleroi, and Landroux, and launched an attack in a centrifugal direction. The campaign takes place in 4 regions. From August 8 to 18, the 1st and 2nd French armies attacked Alsace and Lorraine. On the 20th, the German 6th and 7th Army Corps launched a counterattack, and the French army retreated to the Nancy Highlands. From the 22nd to the 25th, the German 4th and 5th Army Corps and the French 3rd and 4th Army Group engaged in an encounter in the Ardennes. The French army, which was superior in strength, was defeated by the German army, and retreated to Verdun and the Meuse River. On the 21st and 23rd, the German 2nd and 3rd armies forcibly crossed the Sambre River and the Meuse River respectively, forcing the French 5th Army to retreat to the south of Philippeville Point. On the 23rd and 24th, the German 1st Army repelled the British Expeditionary Force to the front lines of Le Cateau and Cambrai. In the Mons area. In this campaign, the two sides participated in the battle with more than 3.5 million troops. During this battle, the British and French allied forces suffered about 300,000 casualties. They lost all fronts north of Verdun, and Paris was threatened. The number 17 plan of the French army against the German army went bankrupt, and the German army took the strategic initiative on the Western Front. Of course, the German army did not have its own strategic goal, and eliminated the main force of the British and French coalition forces in the battle on the French border. Although the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses, the main force withdrew to the south of the Marne River. This allowed the British and French allied forces to have enough troops to defend the Marne River. In addition, France is still mobilizing frantically, organizing more troops to go to the front line for defense. Britain is also sending more expeditionary forces to France. In the end, although the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses, however, it withstood the German attack on the Marne River. The strategic plan that made Germany's rapid demise of France went bankrupt, and the war inevitably turned into a war of attrition, thus entering a very unfavorable situation for Germany. These are all wars that took place in another time and space. But in this time and space, with the existence of the variable Qin Tian, perhaps, all of this will be changed. Your Majesty, the British and French coalition forces have been severely damaged by us, although they still have a lot of troops. But after a series of battles, it can undoubtedly be proved that the combat effectiveness of the German army is absolutely the best in the world. There is no army of any country that can contend against the German army. Little Moltke looked very excited and proud, his face flushed. The 8th Army led by Qin Tian won the Battle of Tannenberg before, which brought him tremendous pressure. But now, through the victory of the French border battle, his position has been consolidated again. The 8th Army wiped out more than 200,000 Russian troops, but he commanded the main force of the German army to wipe out more than 300,000 British and French troops. Not only do we have an advantage in quantity, but we also have an advantage in quality. How could the Russian army be compared with the British and French allied forces? Well done. Now we have gained the advantage in northern France. If we can win the next battle and break through the Marne River, Paris is close at hand. As long as we take Paris, the French will definitely kneel, come down, humiliated, and pray to us for peace. All this will be exactly the same as it was more than 40 years ago. William II's face was flushed, as if he had seen victory. "Yes, your majesty. We are sure to win." Little Maoki even echoed. Other people, including the Minister of War von Falkenhayn, all smiled. Either way, it was the Germans winning at the front. For Germany as a whole, this will be very beneficial. "Your Majesty, the 8th Army has sent a telegram." A staff officer walked in with a smile on his face. "Oh, did the Oscars win again?" William II asked with a smile. The German army won an all-round victory on the frontline battlefield, which made him, the emperor, feel very good. When the battle on the French border had just ended, the Masurian Lake battle between the 8th Army and the Russian 1st Army had also reached its climax. "Yes, your majesty. The 8th Army has called, and the commander of the Russian 1st Army, General Leinenkamp, has officially surrendered to us. The number of surrendered Russian troops is more than 200,000. The 8th Army is now placing prisoners, and take a rest." The staff officers said. The Russian 1st Army surrendered? This news was a great shock to everyone. After all, annihilating an enemy group army, and forcing an enemy group army to surrender, are two completely different concepts. Haha, okay, Oscar and the 8th Army did a great job. First they wiped out the Russian 2nd Army, and then forced the Russian 1st Army to surrender. The Russian Northwest Front Army is finished. The Russians on the Eastern Front, it is no longer possible to pose a threat to us. Wilhelm II laughed. The German army won victory on both the Western and Eastern fronts at the same time, which made him very happy. Now, he is even more sure that Germany will definitely win this battle. "Congratulations, your majesty." The other generals all beamed with joy, especially the Minister of War von Falkenhayn. His old face smiled like a chrysanthemum. Little Moltke also congratulate William II. However, the smile on his face was not very real. Compared to the victory of the 8th Army on the Eastern Front, the victory of the French border battle on the Western Front seems to be nothing at all. Although, they also wiped out 300,000 British and French allied forces. However, the 8th Army, with a force of 180,000, solved the problem of 500,000 Russian troops. This is undoubtedly a great victory. Besides, the 8th Army can be said to have solved the crisis on the Eastern Front on its own. Even if the Russian army will launch an offensive next, Germany has at least survived the most difficult time. On the Western Front, the war will continue. Little Maoki was a little worried. As Qin Tian gained more and more credit in the war, he would inevitably receive more and more attention from William II. At that time, Qin Tian's right to speak will become bigger and bigger. If it is not done well, he will be the chief of the general staff. For little Maoki, power is everything to him, and it must never be lost. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.